So, hello and welcome to Media Musings. To anyone who is lurking and or watching in the future. Now, before we get to the topic at hand, there's a couple of news items that broke in the past week where media is concerned that I figured we'd at least, do a opening highlight of like this week in media, try something fresh. First of which, or at least the first of which that crossed my radar, was Neil Young told Spotify, if you don't stop platforming Joe Rogan's anti-vax conspiracy theories, I'm gonna pull my music. Well, Neil Young is no longer accessible on Spotify.
I have thoughts about this.
Yeah.
And as much as he means well and everything else, my thoughts are not really with Neil Young on this one.
Yeah.
Like, Spotify is a corporate entity that targets entertainment at adults.
Yeah.
Adults are responsible for their own media consumption. Nothing good has ever come from deplatforming anyone. And I think he'll find a platform anywhere, regardless. And it's the same argument for why I want the ex-Cheeto in chief to have his Twitter handle back.
Yeah.
What? Not so they can just mock him?
Yeah. Yes. I want to hear their arguments. I want to hear what they've got to say in public so I can tear them down. Just because they've been given the right to say what they think doesn't mean they're immune from criticism, but we can't criticize them if they're whispering and sussering in back rooms and on Parler where no one goes because it's all frigging Nazis and white supremacists. I would rather they be expected to state their opinion in public on a public forum that's widely accessible and take the criticism for doing so.
So
we all know I am, especially when it comes to adult media, I am radically anti-censorship. So that's my entire thing here is no surprise to anyone, or shouldn't be.
Now, however, there is a slight bit of nuance that may alter things for you.
Well, all I know is that someone's been pulled off it.
Yeah. So the thing is, Spotify is a paid platform, and so by thus allowing Joe Rogan to broadcast exclusively on Spotify, they are also monetarily supporting him.
Okay, but again, someone's gonna profit somewhere.
Yeah.
And the amount of money that Spotify pays people to do stuff is pennies. It ain't doing more than buying him a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And listen, I hear people saying that because he's an anti-vaxxer and he's he's basically inciting people to dangerous behavior. People are adults. It's not like he's going on Disney Plus or somewhere, which I'd have a problem with, because that's targeted more towards kids.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of, we need to stop treating adults like children. And we also need to, there's been this shift in the last 30 years or so, which is my entire lifetime. I know it's all of our entire lifetimes, whereby instead of debating bad issues and bad takes, we simply shut them down and we say, no, that's not allowed. The problem with that is that doesn't silence them, that just pushes them into secrecy. And it also has created a generation, possibly two at this point, who are utterly incapable, by and large, of arguing against some of the worst atrocities and worst takes out there, because their take is, well, you shouldn't be saying that, that's not allowed, and therefore I don't have an argument against you and you don't. No, that's how that ignorance, that inability to point to why vaccines are correct, why racism is bad, why this is bad, that's bad, that inability to understand why, and that insistence on just saying, because we said so, so shut up, that's how these ideas start to take hold again, because they're allowed free rein to grow in the dark.
Yeah.
And I am radically anti-censorship, and my views align very much with the American ACLU, who basically say censorship helps no one and harms everyone, especially the minorities you think you're trying to protect with censorship. And more to the point, right? Has anyone considered Joe Rogan? You deplatform him now. What happens, right? Somewhere on down the line, we keep deplatforming these people we don't like. They start whispering and organizing in the dark, and they take over. The rest of us are fucked, because they are going to treat us exactly with what we've done to them, and we are not going to be able to get a word in to defend ourselves. And frankly, I like having a clear conscience and not being a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And if I've got the right to stand up and call him every wanker under the sun and tell him he's a fucking idiot and to point him to studies about immunology, that means that when he's in power or his opinion is the majority and I disagree, he does the same to me. It goes both ways, but it doesn't go beyond that, and it stays civil because we have principles in place.
Yeah.
And that matters, and you're only as good as you are on your worst day and the worst way you treat people. And at the end of the day, I don't care what he said or what he did, right? He has the right to say what he thinks or feels. He doesn't have the right not to be criticized. He doesn't have the right to cause violence. But he has the right to say what he thinks and feels. And at the end of the day, anyone who is listening to him has a responsibility to do so critically and engage critically with any media they engage with. And isn't that the entire point of us doing these streams every week?
Yeah.
That we engage critically with the media we look at.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's just my rant of the day.
Yeah. And like, my only real take is like it, like if Spotify had, you know, if Spotify had like some kind of demonetization factor, he'd probably just, you know, break his exclusive contract and go to YouTube.
Yeah. So he would, that's what I mean. He'll find a platform somewhere. And he'll monetize it, because that's what people do. I don't believe for half a second that most of these anti-vaxxers, these famous names, believe it. I think they're just on it to make money, and they know it's going to monetize. And they're after the engagement. And quite frankly, right, Neil Young, excellent musician, fantastic, all the rest of it, yeah? It's a little bit embarrassing that he thought he could hold the proverbial gun to Spotify's head. As if any corporation is going to let anyone dictate their content to them and set that kind of precedent. That's just embarrassing, regardless of who does it.
Also, Neil
he's basically complained about losing the Rounders game, so he's taking his bat and ball home. That's what he's done.
Well, also, apparently Neil Young has had issues with Spotify since Spotify was a thing, and this isn't the first time he's pulled his music.
So why doesn't it surprise me that he's got previous gripe and it's an excuse?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the previous gripes were like over sound quality issues or something like that.
It's Spotify. If you want decent sound quality issues, go buy a CD. If you want decent sound quality, go buy a CD or an LP. And go spend $2,000 on a gold cable that does nothing.
Yeah. But in oh, sorry, Chaos.
Sorry.
No, I was just amused by the gold cable comment. Because you're not wrong. But it's funny.
No, I'm not wrong, because I know a lot of people who claim to be audiophiles and they don't know shit about how to set up a set of speakers.
And apparently at least one other artist has joined in.
Yeah. I think that
the
Spotify...
only way Spotify are going to bend is if it becomes unprofitable for them not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, Spotify is a profit-driven enterprise.
I think they should, but will not, put some sort of disclaimer that this goes against known science.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But, you know.
And just at this point from Microraptor has got a point. Spotify is a young person's system. Do you know anyone under 35 who has Spotify? Over 35 who has Spotify, really?
Actually, the only reason I have Spotify is because my mom has a paid family account.
Right. So, but your mom has 3 teenagers in the family, or at one point had 3 teenagers in the family.
Yeah.
So I can understand that. And, you know, if you live somewhere small and you haven't got storage for CDs or LPs, it's great. Or, you know, you do a lot of traveling and you want to stream or whatever. But listen, if someone like Justin Bieber or some K-pop band did it, Spotify would kick Joe Rogan straight away.
Yeah.
Because they'd lose about 40% of their listenership overnight. Because K-pop stans are just mad when they get it into their heads to do something. Yeah. You know, if it went viral on TikTok, let's boycott Spotify, they'd kick him because he would no longer be profitable. But as long as he's more profitable than any losses they're losing, that is not gonna happen.
Yeah. And
And also, let's face it, unless it was the K-pop stands, most people my age have no idea how to boycott properly.
Exactly.
Now, so, you know, since we are just kind of doing highlights of the of the news as an opener, let's move from a story about, you know, adults choosing their media to a rather other to one that involves children.
See, this next story you're going to talk about, because I know which one you're going to talk about, is actually a very good example of why I don't think a Spotify boycott is right.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to control the media. And look what happens when the people who you don't like are in control on what they do. And do you really want that to be the precedent that is set and that to be acceptable?
So, a Tennessee school board removed the graphic novel Mouse from their English curriculum unit covering the Holocaust.
And the argument was because it had mild cursing in it.
Yeah, it was it was over 8 curse words and a depiction of a naked woman.
Right. First of all, if that's the problem you have with the content in that book, i.e. with what's actually going on in the story of that book, your priorities are fucked. You know, you probably should have read that book as a child if that's what your problem is with the content of that book.
Yeah.
Second of all, Why is it always graphic novels with these people? Can they pick up a normal book and read it? Like, if they've got problems with 8 swear words and a naked woman, right? There are unabridged versions of Anne Frank out there where she talks about how beautiful women are and talks about masturbating. Yeah, there are stories out there of, you know, World War One soldiers and really homoerotic poetry out there.
Yeah.
Like, why are you so willing to show children violence, but you're not willing to show them sex or language? Words.
The funny,
the whole thing is that there's the words. The words are really mild. It's like words like damn, isn't it?
Yeah.
That are, and it's like, okay, but don't you understand that that is really indicative of the entire problem, that you are giving words way too much power?
Well, see, here's how school bands and library bands work in the US. Someone's going to find something that doesn't agree with their worldview, like, say, Mouse or The Handmaid's Tale, and they'll pick out instances of bad language or sexually explicit scenes and get them banned for that.
Okay.
yeah, if they
Show
don't
me a parent who's never sworn in front of their child.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they don't like even a depiction of a naked woman, no one show them the A-level English literature syllabus. Every single one of them has.
And yes, that's
Chaos. Is it still Love Through the Ages, the syllabus?
I'm not certain, but every
where you
single
had to
book...
read Edward II, and you basically do like everything from The Wife of Bath straight through to sort of 50 Shades.
I'm not certain, but possibly. I mean, one of my partners did the first, like, most of the first year, I think, of English literature, at A level, and every single novel they had to cover had explicit depictions of sexual assaults.
Yeah, and
for
if it
16-year-olds.
didn't, it had really like highly symbolic depictions of sex and sexual assault.
Yeah, so if they have a problem with a few swear words and a naked lady, they might want to take it up with the whole of a significant amount of education systems on the fucking planet.
Yeah.
Yes, but let's be honest, A-level literature is pretty much just an excuse for 16-year-olds to find decent porn. That's pretty much what it's for.
And Microraptor, yes.
Yes, Microraptor it is.
And I actually went and read through the minutes of that meeting, and honestly, that meeting deserves its own deep dive.
Oh dear.
You sent me a line from it, and I genuinely worry why America has not descended into civil. Like, I have read less inflammatory, less divisive statements in declarations of war.
Like there was everything in that meeting, from think of the children to we should just scrap Common Core and let's get rid of, or, we should just scrap the curriculum and rebuild from scrap to, is this really the morals that we're instilling in our children? To it's all over the place.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
What morals is this book instilling in anyone's child that they don't like?
Accepting Jewish people?
The explicitly mentioned example was the the narrator cusses out his father in a scene.
Some fathers need to be cussed out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, can I just... This is the same argument you just described there. I'm going to take you back in American history a little bit.
Yeah.
To Colin Kaepernick and him kneeling during football games.
Yeah.
And everyone in America, well, the loudest people in America, were tone policing black people. And they were saying, you know, if you're going to protest, do it peacefully. Same with BLM year before last. If you're going to protest, do it peacefully. The thing is, though, right, when you are killing people, when you are committing a genocide, and people stand up and say no, your problem shouldn't be with their fucking tone.
Yeah, like some people are angry because it's a little bit fucking justified.
Yeah. Anger is justified. And there's this thing, and I don't know, I see it really with white people. It's not something that I grew up with, where there's this push to be polite. You must always be polite. You must never speak out of turn. You must never get aggressive or angry. And there's a lot of tone policing, and a lot of it's bound up in silencing black women. But it's also...
Sorry, Noodle.
I have this, and I say this with all love for all the white people I know. Some white people really don't understand the difference between polite and kind.
Yeah.
You can be kind while swearing and shouting and being incredibly blunt. You can be polite while you are murdering someone.
Yeah.
And some people need to understand that what this world needs more is kindness, not politeness. Politeness is why everyone thinks the UK is a bastion of progressive politics and integrated culture, and it's one of the most racist countries on the planet.
And it is also Turf Island.
It's polite. Because it's very British, it's very polite. Just because the racism's polite doesn't mean people aren't being shot in the streets.
Yeah, it's been my experience generally, the whole attitude of like, well, we need to debate this and get everyone intellectually convinced and then everything will be okay, is a white boys game.
Okay, but some arguments are not intellectual. And you cheapen them by trying to intellectualize them.
Yeah, and
the only people who want to intellectualize an emotive argument like this are the people to whom it has no effect on, and not the people who were taught as children. And you know, these same people who were saying my kids are too young to know about this, I want them to have their innocence. When I was your kid's age, I was living things like this. Not to the extent of the Holocaust. I was living racism while you couldn't explain to my classmate what racism was.
And the class or the grade level that it was for, that this module was for eighth graders.
How old are eighth graders?
Like early teens, preteens.
What, 10, 11?
Probably closer to 11, 12. Okay, hold on.
So they're either year 7s or year 8s, I think, is the deal.
Okay, so I'm doing backwards math. Hold on. So we're looking at like around 13, 14, you know, between 12 and 14 years old.
So it's year 8s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you learning in year 8, Chaos? I remember what I was learning.
Oh, there was quite a bit. We had plagues. We were shown pictures of some of the most STIs in the British education system's history. We were taught about the Holocaust and shown pictures of concentration camps.
We see pictures of concentration camps. Yeah, we were seeing, what were we seeing? We were being taught The Tempest in English class and taught about how Caliban was a representation of black people and how the time was racist and everything else. And we were being taught in science class about the development of evolutionary theory and how there was a time when they thought black people evolved differently to white people and were more closely related to apes than white people. We were being taught about
a lot of that was
religious studies class. I went to a Catholic school. In religious studies class, we were being taught about how Christians were thrown to the lions and burned along the Appian Way alive on stakes. We were being given Tacitus to read.
We didn't have quite as thorough a religious education. I was at a Church of England school, but they were covering.
Okay, but from the age of 2 years old, when I was christened, there's a picture of me at my christening, stood in front of a gory-looking crucifix in a church.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and in year 8, a Christian youth group I was at taught us about active burning of Christians and gave us depictions and shit.
Yeah.
And parents were fine with that.
Yeah, they were fine with that. But they weren't fine with us having proper anatomically correct sex education.
And I just feel like this needs to be read out loud. I say, would you please kindly stop being so upset about hundreds of years of oppression?
Yeah, you do a better British accent than I do.
Yeah.
No, but it is very much, it's that thing of you're taught your place. And the thing is, right, Mouse is a very good book because it doesn't shy away from the truth. And the truth is that regular people were complicit and knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And did nothing. And that's a hard truth for a lot of people. And the thing is, right, the scenes in Mouse of children joining in.
Yeah.
And things like that, which are horrific to think about, because you shy away from it instinctively because you think no one could be that terrible, and you know what it all added up to. But we have seen that people really are that terrible.
Yeah,
I saw a great quote because there's arguments also about critical race theory in America going on as well.
Yeah.
Right. And I saw a great tweet. I can't remember whose it was, but I saw it. Sure, retweeted it that said, "White people don't want their grandkids being taught critical race theory because they don't want their grandkids being taught that they were the ones who were trying to keep black kids out of school."
Yeah.
And it's I'm a great believer in living your life in the best possible way and living your life in such a way that you can justify yourself.
Yeah.
And these people quite clearly can't justify themselves, which means that not only do they know it's wrong now, they knew it was wrong then. Because you can always plead ignorance and you can always say, look, I didn't know, but I learned and I'm better now. And most people will accept that and allow for that growth. But if you knew it was wrong then, you can't make that argument. You can't make that defense. And that's why they are terrified. These white people, the same white people who 60, 70 years ago were calling for segregation and wanted to continue with segregation in America, are terrified that their white grandchildren will be shown books in America about slavery, about the Holocaust and everything else, and that they will have empathy with the victims instead of having empathy with their grandparents who were the perpetrators. And that's why these people are trying to silence it.
Go on, sorry.
In a slightly positive turn of events, Mouse is now pretty much the #1 best-selling graphic novel in the U.S.
Good. I think it probably knocked Son of Kal-El off the #1 spot.
I am baffled by the people who seem to think I was just following orders means I didn't know what I was doing, or somehow
Look,
washes their hands.
I was just following orders is not a defense, and it hasn't been since 1947.
Yeah.
I was just following orders is not a defense.
But I'm amazed by the amount of white people who I know who will literally justify their grandparents' actions with that statement, and I'm like, bitch.
It's not a defense.
Yeah.
It's not a defense. People have hung for trying to present that defense. It's not a defense.
But anything else to add? Because remember, this is a quick look over. I am definitely considering, just some other time pulling, maybe next week, pulling up the minutes and just doing a deep dive on the minutes of that meeting, because it is worth taking a look at.
Santi just said that 8th graders are 14 to 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
So for Brits, that's year 9.
Yeah.
You turn 16 in year 10, don't you? Or is it year 11 you turn 16?
Year 11 you turn 16.
So this is 14 turning 15. So this is year 10s.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, in year 10 they were straight up showing those films with sex scenes in English just for shits and giggles.
When I was in year 10, there were girls dropping out because they were pregnant.
Yeah, I'm just ignoring that bit.
Yeah.
And we knew. So what innocences do you really think a 15-year-old's got?
Yeah.
I'd be willing to bet that this is just the result of Christian mothers wanting to think the best.
There's a lot there's a lot of different agendas at play in that meeting that you can get from the minutes, and it's an interesting.
I just feel like any parent who puts their head in the sand better be prepared to hold the grandchild when it comes through at 14, 15.
Or, if you put your family's head in the sand, you get people like me.
And me.
Yeah, it's like, do you really want them to turn out like me?
Remember that joke? Live your life as if so the Westboro Baptist Church pickets your funeral.
Yeah.
That's what. Yeah. But yeah, Santi's just said something interesting in the chat. Said people have been shot for not following orders.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there comes a point where every human being, especially in a situation like that, where you have to decide what you're willing to live for and what you're willing to die for.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who were shot because they refused to take part. We remember those people as heroes. We remember the White Rose Society, the French Resistance. There were plenty of people who were killed because they refused to take part.
Yeah.
So at some point you do have to make a decision of, I keep saying this, I think I said it on last stream and a stream before that. There's a great line from the Pirates of the Caribbean. It says, it's not about living forever. It's about living with yourself forever.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think I could live with myself if I, even at gunpoint, did something like that knowingly.
Yeah.
So that's my take on that.
Yeah.
I get it. Some people are not in that situation. And if someone put a gun, say, to Ring's head and told me to do something, I'd probably do a lot more than I would if they did it to mine. And I know you're not defending anything, Santi. I'm not saying you are. But what I'm saying is everyone has got... great quote. There's a great quote by a Stoic philosopher, Epictetus, and it goes, "Consider at what price you will sell your integrity, but for God's sake, do not sell it cheap."
Yeah.
And that's a really important quote, and it's a really important, I think, thought experiment that everyone should have to sit down and just sit with that quote for a while and decide who you are and what you stand for.
And banning books and media is something that's always kind of going on, which is why I always set September aside for literature, because because Banned Book Week is like the second or third week of September.
Well, this is the thing Santi's saying there, that we thought this book ban crap was a fight we fought when he was a child.
Yeah.
It was a fight we were fighting when I was a child. I had to fight my school to get Anne Frank put in the library. There were certain books that I had to fight my school to get put in the library. They wouldn't put Boy in Striped Pajamas in the general library.
Or, certain churches, while I was a child, burned certain books.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I thought Krabby Hermit was Santa.
Oh. No, apparently we were wrong.
I apologize. I thought you were someone completely different. I apologize.
I think Santy goes under Gilded Rose Adventures now.
Cool. Yeah, I apologize, Krabby. Sandy, I genuinely thought you were Santy the Sane. I don't know what my brain did there. Blame the dyslexia. I've probably heard someone call you Sandy and misheard it at some point, and it's got stuck in my head.
Once known as never again.
Aha, now I know who you are. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts on the new on the news that came up last week before we get to the main?
It's not that children can't handle it, it's that you can't handle it.
Yeah.
Stop using children as an excuse. Which is a nice segue into the fact that we're going to discuss Disney, which has some of the darkest themes known to humanity in media and is targeted at children.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on these news stories, Chaos?
Not really. Beyond. Just
Yeah. Okay. So, Disney. Where do we want to start with the problematic tropes of Disney?
Let's start with, two things. First of all, I've just spent 30 minutes ranting about being anti-censorship. Disney is targeted at children. Those rules don't apply. Children are not expected to be critical thinkers. Cognitively, you do not develop the ability to fully differentiate between fiction and reality until you're approximately 7 years old. And that's in normal human development.
Yeah.
Okay? That's why kids under that age have, like, imaginary friends and stuff.
Yeah. Also, I'd say Disney's primary business or media production model, or at least in the era we're mostly focusing on, adds another layer of exception for them.
I feel like when we talk about Disney being problematic, when we talk about any media being problematic, we have to establish that we are not saying, therefore, that means this media shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
What we are doing is honestly and openly criticizing that media.
Yes.
We are doing what banning it would prevent us from doing.
Yeah. Now, oh, go on, Chaos.
We will probably criticize some films that we still would actively choose to watch.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. In fact, like...
We have an entire mob month coming up.
Yeah, and I mean, in fact, what sparked the idea for this stream, for this, conversation stream, was a discussion me and Noodle had when we realized that there were problematic things that we were going to have to go over in regards to Emperor's New Groove.
Which we did a fair bit on. But Disney's... We also have to, I think, be very clear that we have to contextualize Disney's output within its era of production and publication. There is no point in, for example, judging Sleeping Beauty, which was originally a Grimm's fairy tale and then a Disney story, on the same basis that we judge Frozen.
Yeah.
From a political, progressive point of view, because they come from two radically different eras and radically different histories.
Yes.
And it's like we cannot, retroactively apply our sensibilities to historical texts.
Yes.
And if you really want me to talk about why that particular comment is timely, go look at what Biden did to get out of doing anything halfway useful like last month or the month before.
But the reason I said that, because I'd say my first major criticism for Disney's media production, and now I'm talking specifically Disney animation, is basically their entire model is just, hey, let's take something in the public domain and then make our version of it so culturally ubiquitous that it is the only version that people are aware of.
Yeah. Now, there's an argument to say, there are, and Disney are not the only ones who do it. Hollywood does it so much. Like, do you really think the majority of people who like the MCU movies give a damn about comic books?
Yeah, or do you think the majority of people who've watched Encanto recently even know there's a book?
Yeah, or even know that there's a story it's based on?
Yeah, I could have guessed that it was a book because Disney, like, basically their business model is cribbing off books.
Yeah. I mean, there's entire academic departments at some universities that look purely at, say, classical reception.
Yeah.
Look at how... If you say to the average layperson, what does ancient Rome look like? And they'll describe to you a scene from Gladiator.
Yeah.
Because that's ubiquitous. That's what ancient Rome means. Someone a little bit older might describe Cleopatra to you. It's... Visual media has that impact in a way other things don't. Historical fiction has a very similar impact on some people. Some people read historical fiction instead of reading actual history. So, it has... A lot of people look at things like, the Italian job. I genuinely had someone ask me a couple of years ago when I was at university. We were both history students, university, and we were talking about some serial killer TV show or something, and someone genuinely said the words, "When are they going to do Hannibal Lecter?" And I had to explain to this grown-ass adult, this 23-year-old adult, that Hannibal Lecter was not a real person. That was not a real serial killer.
Much as I'm sure
loosely on a person that Thomas Harris met, but was not actually, the cannibal, the well-spoken Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah. Yeah. Much as I'm sure the reality shifters would like to disagree with us.
Don't get... You are not reality. You have not discovered reality shifting. You have discovered maladaptive daydreaming. Don't at me.
Yeah, or lucid dreaming at best.
If you do it in the middle of the day, it's maladaptive daydreaming.
Yeah, I guess it depends when they do it.
Yeah. So yeah, that they just... Children's media, I am more, when it comes to children's media, just in general, I'm more worried about children accessing adult media than I am about the content of children's media. But with Disney, basically, let's be honest, writing fan fiction and stuff and making the fan fiction ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Because that's basically what they're doing. Let's be honest, they're sanitizing it, wrapping it in colours and
to the point where they then want to try and claim that it's theirs in the first place. Cough, cough, Loki.
Yeah. But then you've got things like Dante's Inferno did it, Milton did it, and these things became part of religious canon. Like Dante's Inferno, there was no concept of
circles of hell.
Circles of hell. And then the Catholic Church adopted it. Neil Gaiman freely admits that the American Gods series is essentially Norse Edda fan fiction.
Yeah.
And there is a line. There is a line that you don't cross, and the line is that you have respect for the original. But especially when it's targeted at kids, I think what's really insidious about Disney is that it's targeted at kids who don't know to go and find the source material.
Yeah.
And that is kind of that dark grey area of, okay, but that's a problem because you're not teaching kids to critically engage. Now, do I expect a 4-year-old to sit in front of a princess movie and critically engage with it?
No.
No, I expect them to sit down, shut up, and suck their thumb. That's what I expect. But from a young age, you're training these kids not to question and training these kids to accept the story from one output house, if you like.
Yeah.
One publishing house. Like, when I was younger, we used to have, like, Ladybird books of the different Disney movies.
Yeah.
Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? I had the full collection at one point. And I used to read those more often than I watched the movies.
Yeah.
And they taught me to access the media in a different way.
So okay, here's a fun thing, right? One of my favorite books growing up was The Jungle Book, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I had seen Disney's version of The Jungle Book before I read The Jungle Book.
I should hope so.
Yeah.
Purely because the actual Jungle Book is not suitable for someone who the Disney version is.
Age-wise. Like like I had seen the Disney one when I was like 5. I think I first read, I had first read the Jungle Book when I was like 10.
Mm.
On my first read through of the Jungle Book, I was confused as fuck.
Because you expected something that wasn't there.
Yeah. And then, like, on my second read through, it actually soured my... It soured my enjoyment of the animated film.
Mm-hmm. We've all done it. We've all seen a film and gone to read the book and realised the book's better.
Yeah.
Or the book is more nuanced, or there's something about the book that the film just missed.
That being said, I still hold that the 2016 live action remake is probably the closest we'll get to a good Jungle Book movie with a PG rating.
Yeah. Because a PG rating is for kids.
Yeah.
And you kind of do have to allow for that. Because you sort of think about Disney output and you think about films like, say, Hercules.
Yeah.
They could not have been true to the source material and made a Hercules movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was PG rated.
Yeah.
Because just no. Can you imagine? Really? Wow.
I mean, hell, imagine if they were being true to the source material with The Lion King.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because everyone knows The Lion King is just Hamlet with lions.
Yeah.
Or
but
Cinderella would have made much less of a kids movie if there were like people chopping feet off and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, chopping toes off to get bloody stumps into slippers and things.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the reason I said Hercules specifically is because part of the joy that I have seen, that it seems to be something a lot of people who've got interest in classical mythology share, is part of the joy in looking back and thinking, I loved Hercules as a kid, and then I went and read the books and I learned a little bit more. And then as I got older, I accessed the more adult versions and it built up, so there was always something new.
Yeah.
So that was, not that's not necessarily a bad thing when that happens. And then you get other things though, like for example, Pocahontas.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, even though I did American studies at university, I never had any interest in like the exploratory age of sort of pre-Constitution America. I have very little interest in it. And so I never really looked into that. But I'm sure people who looked into it and found the true story of it. I know the true story in a sort of vague terms.
Yeah.
I'm sure they've eventually you do have to eventually make your peace with the fact that you weren't told everything as a child.
Yeah.
So I can understand why Disney sanitizes it. And why Disney has the reputation of sanitizing. My problem is with the IP theft.
Yeah.
Now, it's not so much the IP theft that bothers me, because like we said, there's Milton, there's Dante's Inferno. Yeah. The entire Renaissance was basically just Bible fanfic and fan art.
Well, I think it's more monopolizing.
It's the then trying to claim.
Yeah.
It's the monetizing the IP theft. It's why fan fiction writers don't like 50 Shades of Grey. It's Like most fan fiction authors disavow 50 Shades of Grey because you took a fan fiction and you made money off it, and that's a big no-no.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same reason a lot of fan fiction writers, for example, aren't all that keen on Clarissa Clare. Because that started out as a Harry Potter fan fiction. And then she basically took it out, changed the names, and published it as an original story.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's where the issue is. If you have taken something that belonged to everyone and have stolen it for your own monetary gain, I can shrug and say, well, that's capitalism, but that doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
Which, is that what you were getting at?
Well, first to quote John Mellencamp, calling it your job sure don't make it right. And
what was it Sam said earlier?
What?
I was only following orders is not a defense.
Yeah. But it's less the issue I have. It's less the issue about monetizing it and more the issue that they're de facto monopolizing it.
Same difference. Because if they are monetizing it, that means they've trademarked it, and then they are aggressively defending that trademark. So it's the same difference. And one feeds into the other. They don't monetize it without trademarking it. They can't make money off it without the trademark. So the two things go together. They become synonymous in the case of Disney.
Yeah. Though, it's more how aggressively they make their monetized version, synonymous as the only version. Until they need to make a live action remake.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I get where you're coming from. I just look. No one is suggesting that Disney is submitting its output for peer review.
Yeah.
They are not required to cite their sources. Ergo, they don't.
Yeah.
Would we prefer if they did? Well, yeah. But they're not gonna. So I don't like it. But at the end of the day, Disney is a profit-driven enterprise. And if there were 14 different films about the same Disney princess who wasn't actually a Disney princess because Disney weren't the only ones who'd made a film about her, there would be a lot more competition in the market, and probably there wouldn't be a major animation house that would have risen to the top. They'd have probably all died off fighting each other over copyright. So,
I mean, look at what happened when Disney had its, lull of dominance in the 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Fox, we had DreamWorks, we had just about every other studio popping up with an animation department that each made at least one big hit.
And where are they all now?
I think DreamWorks is still going fairly strong.
Out of how many?
Yeah.
The market got saturated.
Yeah, well, I mean, DreamWorks is still growing strong and Sony's still going strong just off Spider-Man. But that's mirroring their live action department too. So
the only way a market can exist with multiple providers is if each provider is incredibly specialized.
Yeah.
The reason Disney has a monopoly is because it is a generalized publishing house. It's the same reason Penguin Books are so ubiquitous, because
Yeah.
Penguin publish everything from manuals of how to change a car tire through to children's novels, through to adult books, through to versions of classic books. You know, they publish everything. That doesn't mean there's not space within the market for smaller ones. But if you say to someone, name me a publishing house, they're going to say Penguin, Bloomsbury,
Random House, Zondervan.
Random House. Yeah. These big generalized ones.
Yeah,
and the problem
maybe...
is, the thing with books is books are such a massive market. That's the thing with books. There's a massive market, and they are relatively low cost to maintain, and reasonably easy to turn a profit on a book.
Yeah. Though,
you can't do that with animation because it's so labor intensive.
Though, to be fair, Random House Random House Zondervan and Tyndale is probably a bit too niche for most people.
No, Random House.
In fairness, the one I would have gone to is pretty niche. Is Llewellyn.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you have you have one or two big general ones that publish everything, and then you have your specialist niches. And anyone who's ever tried to publish a book knows you don't go to a general publisher. You go to a publisher who specializes in your genre. Disney is the publisher that specializes in animation genre.
Yeah.
If you want to publish, if you want to make an American sitcom, you don't go to Disney, you go to NBC or you go to HBO.
Yeah.
If you want to make something really adult, HBO, you go to, if you want to make a children's program, you go to PBS.
Yeah.
That's all Disney is filling that niche of being a general animation house.
Yeah.
But animation is so labor intensive and so expensive that there is not space within the animation market for small niche animators to make it big, because it costs too much to start up.
Yeah.
That's the problem. The problem is not that Disney is a symptom. The problem is the expense and the startup costs of an animation house. Now, we are slowly moving towards an area where, you get small indie creators online creating animation and things. But even then, let's be honest, do you really think anyone who makes animated videos and puts them on YouTube is making a living from that? Maybe OSP are making a living.
Yeah.
Maybe Kings and Generals are making pocket money.
Yeah.
Depending on how you define it, like Dark Matter 2525, if you define what he does as animation, lives off it. But that's for a specific niche with a lot of online support.
Exactly.
And I mean, with the advent of streaming services, there are some more independent animation projects being released.
Yeah, and it has democratized the process a little bit because the technology has become more accessible. But it is still difficult to break into the market. And it's not because Disney has saturated the market, and it's not because, the Japanese are taking over the market. It's because it's fucking expensive to advertise effectively.
Yeah. Oh, and for those of you who want to bitch about the Japanese takeover of animation,
that's what I think of you.
No. Here's a fun little fact for you in terms of cinematic Japanese animation in particular. Everything done by Studio Ghibli is distributed through Disney in the West.
Exactly. So even other studios who are big enough and do have the money and the technology are using Disney's distribution channels.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's difficult to create. You know, if you're advertising something to kids on a kids' TV show, that costs money.
Yeah.
Kids ain't on Twitter retweeting their favorite cartoon. So you're not getting that word of mouth advertising that streamers, etc., rely on. Yeah. Therefore, you're never going to have something that can beat Disney's established marketing designs.
Plus, you kind of have to pay to get the equipment to get quality. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, look at us. Look at the state of my camera today because I'm using a laptop webcam. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, even, I bought a green screen, and even the green screen's not right because the lighting's not right. The lighting's expensive. And that's for live action. When you think of animation, drawing frame by frame.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know artists who will take literally months over a single still image commission that they're making. And that's like fan art and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And animation studios, people who are trained in animation are trained to do it faster. And we've got 3D rendering now, and we've got, a lot of it's technology driven. But when you cut away all of that, there is still someone sat down with a pen and a piece of paper, or the technological equivalent of, a pen and a trackpad.
Yeah.
And you can't take that labor out of it. And as long as it's labor intensive, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And and it's a skilled position. It's a very, very skilled thing. It's not something everyone can do. So I don't know. For me, I just think I don't like that Disney has a monopoly, but it's the best of a bad lot insofar as what the alternatives would be.
Yeah, while we still function under like a capitalist system where corporations are going to go with the incentive in terms of money, I don't think that's avoidable.
Yeah, Disney is a symptom of capitalism. So, eat the rude, eat the rich. Wait. Yeah, eat the rich.
Yeah, no, if we just ate the rude, we'd be leaving the impolite dicks like we discussed earlier.
Yeah. Eat the rich.
Yeah. Embrace the Hannibal fandom a bit.
Yeah. To be fair, we need to thin the Hannibal fandom down. We're getting a lot of antis recently. Also, I learned while we're waiting for Ring to come back, Encanto has antis. The Encanto fandom has antis.
That tracks. I am not surprised.
In which the main character writes uncle-niece incest stories, and the entire family are okay with this, has antis. And the best bit, one of the aunties yesterday argued that it was okay for the fictional character to write stories about uncle-niece incest because the fictional character knew that their story was fictional to them.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
My favorite flavor of bullshit.
But real people in the real world are not allowed to make fan art or write fan fiction of Encanto because the characters don't consent. And that's incest and it's illegal. Let that sink in. Just let that let sit with that for a moment. But yeah. Basically, Disney is a result of capitalism, and eat the rich if you want more animation studios.
Now that we've talked about the horrible well, rather the horrible method of their whole content mill.
Mm.
All right, shall we move to problematic, persistent tropes within the Disney canon?
Only if we can clarify that these tropes are problematic because they are presented uncritically to children.
Yeah.
And when we say problematic, we are not saying therefore ban them. We are saying sit down and talk to your toddler about why this is a bit out of date.
Yeah. I mean, shout out to Encanto for pulling like 95% of the weight for people of color who don't get turned into animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, but I hear good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should watch it. Like the only reason we're not talking about Encanto is one, it's only just been out, and two, we literally just finished animation month.
Yeah, I haven't even watched Luca yet. Never mind Encanto.
Yeah.
I'm really behind on Disney.
Yeah.
But the thing with Disney is, and I will say this, for everything I'm about to say about the issues with the tropes Disney presents and has always presented, you have to look at the source material.
Yeah.
And when they are using source material that's over 100 years old, so they don't fall into the trap of breaching the law that they lobbied to introduce in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because that's another thing. Pretty much anything made after Mickey will never go into the public domain because Disney keeps on extending implicit copyright.
Yeah. Then you have to grasp that the most recent origin of plot you're going to get from Disney is a story from the early 1900s or the late 1800s.
Yeah, I mean, if we got really lucky, I guess they could technically do like the 1950s.
No, because Mickey predates the 50s.
Yeah.
You know, so they're pretty much never going to do anything, for example, without having discussions with the estate or buying out the estates of major authors. For example, that rips off Lord of the Rings or Lovecraft or anything like that.
Well, Lovecraft is in the public domain.
Well, Lovecraft is, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Sherlock Holmes will be soon.
To be fair, they managed to sanitize Grimm's fairy tale, so they probably will get round to Lovecraft eventually. So, you know, you have to understand, again, we cannot hold them to the same standards, which is why I think, especially in the last decade or so, that Disney and Pixar, because obviously they're joined now, which is why I think they are moving towards going out of Western canon to find stories, because they know that if they keep mining, let's be honest, English literature for content, they are not going to find anything that's palatable to a modern audience, no matter how much they sanitize it.
Yeah.
That's why that I think is probably a major reason why they're going outside of English speaking literature for content.
There's only so much that you can whitewash and shove glitter on shit before it becomes a bit noticeable.
Yeah.
And to be fair, we'd noticed that by the 90s. So, yeah.
Though, and you know, crowing about diversity probably also helps a little.
Yeah. Oh, look at us, we're so progressive. Have you seen your back catalogue?
Yeah.
Performing progressiveness and being progressive are two very different things.
Yeah.
At the moment, I am still in the camp of I'm pretty sure Disney's performing it.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, being progressive is profitable.
I'm pretty sure it's a mix of Disney performing it and certain people within Disney who are like directing or whatever slipping it by them.
Yeah, Pixar, basically.
Yeah. And in behalf on to answer on behalf of a certain ill-mannered badger, or rather ill-mannered mustelid. When discussing Disney, Disney is canon. When discussing properties outside of Disney, it gets more wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Okay, so in that case, then is the MCU canon, but everything on Disney Plus and these new TV shows that show that Disney still hates people who have trauma not canon?
Those are still part of the MCU.
Damn it. Disney really hates people with trauma.
They do. It's like people will point out a lot of ableism in Disney, but the ableism that I don't see pointed out very much is against people with PTSD and CPTSD.
Yeah. To be fair, CPTSD was only like defined in 1992, so I can kind of, but like there is literally a description that you can apply modern diagnostic criteria to in order to get a diagnosis of PTSD in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is something I learned this weekend.
So
so there's not really an excuse for it.
It is interesting that we're talking about trauma, considering how the most recent animated Disney movie is basically familial trauma, the movie.
Yeah, it's literally generational trauma, and it specifically covers a lot of Colombian things, and a lot of like Latin things. Pardon?
Does it cover hippos?
No, there aren't any hippos.
That's a terrible thing to say, but it's one of the few things I do know about Colombia.
Forestry products and all that stem from that are a bit too adult for Disney.
Disney threw someone off a cliff while their child watched.
See, that's actually a funny thing about Disney is I don't think Disney now would make some of the old Disney films.
Yeah, like we were talking right at the start of this stream about how people want to protect their children's innocence.
Yeah.
And yet how many people worldwide have the same semi-trauma? I won't say trauma because it's not long term, but at least acute trauma response from watching The Lion King when they were like 4 years old, or from watching Bambi. How many people still like go, "Oh, Bambi," and like sort of fake a tear when you mention Bambi or The Fox and the Hound, or like, you know, these films basically traumatized multiple generations.
Yeah. Especially when, as we discussed earlier, telling facts from fiction gets a little bit sticky until about 7 years old, usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, right, I probably have more. Let's say you get two people of the same age who were old enough, who were about 10 years old at the turn of the century, give or take. Yeah. I probably have more in common with someone who was a Disney child and watched The Lion King than I do someone who also watched the news broadcast of the Twin Towers. on a trauma bonding basis, because everyone remembers, they are pretty much on the same level of ubiquity. Like, did The Lion King give you nightmares? Did Titanic give you nightmares?
Yeah.
Did you see the 9/11 coverage? And do you remember the first time you watched a Harry Potter movie? That's basically young millennials. That's what we have in common.
Or are you still traumatized by the scary tunnel? Willy Wonka.
Yeah, but that's also the generation. That's basically all millennials.
Yeah.
So that's like 20 years worth of generational trauma in there.
Yeah.
And before then, we were telling scary stories to kids in the form of the Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah.
You can go all the way back to friggin' ancient Greek and Aesop's fables if you like.
Yeah.
Those stories aren't exactly child-friendly when you look at them, are they?
Yeah. My favourite is, I'm pretty sure it was a Spartan one about the boy who stole the fox.
Oh, yeah. The boy who cried wolf. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like, if Disney made a story about that.
Yeah.
They'd probably sanitize it, and everyone at the end would have come and they'd have caught the wolf and domesticated it, and then there'd be a flash forward 15 years to its great grandchildren playing with the boy's great grandchildren out in a field and helping herd the sheep. That would be how Disney would have to present that, as a sanitized version.
I mean, technically that's what happened. Technically, that makes it historically accurate.
Yeah, no, because what it does there is conflate a fable with the story of the domestication of dogs. But that, yeah, but you know what I mean? Imagine if Disney tried to do Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
Yeah, that did occur to me. Or some slightly less well-known ones, like The Wolf and the Seven Lambs, I think it is.
Oh, yeah. The Wolf and the Seven Kids.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even look at what they did to The Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Disney sanitizes for children. And it's children's media, so yeah, okay. And a lot of people say, oh, well, I only saw Disney, so I didn't know any better. Like, the best one, Atlantis.
Yeah.
Disney's Atlantis. The number of grown-ass adults who, because they saw the Disney movie, think Atlantis was a real place. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just no. Or the number of people who get to adulthood and because they saw Atlantis go try and find out about Atlantis and then end up reading philosophy.
Yeah.
These things have their place as an entry to more complex texts and documents in adulthood. But it does depend. You kind of have to. I can forgive Disney a lot in the same way I can forgive the film The Gladiator a lot.
Yeah.
Or I can forgive the Titanic a lot. Or I can forgive Ben-Hur. Or I can forgive Saving Private Ryan. Or I can forgive Battleship Potemkin and films like that. Because they get people interested in the truth.
Yeah.
And I know many a classicist who still to this day maintain that their first and favourite example of classical reception is the Disney Hercules movie. Because let's be honest, who doesn't love a great movie with a brilliant soundtrack and animation that still stands up.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you like that? And the problem is...
I still haven't seen the Disney Hercules all the way through.
Yeah, we'll fix that.
I was about to ask if you two are not married.
Wait. Does that mean you've never gone the distance? Yeah, it's like we're going to do Mob Mafia month. I can forgive The Godfather a lot because it gets people curious about the history of the mafia.
Yeah.
And it's also a great film.
Yeah.
You know, or as Scum has said in the chat, The Untouchables.
Yeah.
Although that's propaganda, so that's slightly different.
I can forgive the Disney Tarzan.
Yeah. Or I can forgive a lot of Vietnam War films.
Because if you read the original Tarzan, it needed some updating.
Yeah, a little bit.
And that knife cuts both ways.
Yeah.
You know, it cuts both ways. When we say that we write a modern retelling of a story and we fix some of the problematic elements of it without losing the deeper truth of the text.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. It's no different than releasing another translation of the Iliad.
Yeah.
You know? And we're still doing that to 5,000 years later.
Yeah.
Did you nearly go 2,000 years?
Yeah, or Beowulf, or pretty much any ancient text. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one of the...
That doesn't... Please don't anyone mistake me to mean that means you should write, like, a sanitized version of Zeus where he's in love with all his girlfriends, really, and his wife, and he are in an open polyamorous relationship, and it's all consensual and they all love each other. Please don't write that.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Like, there's a reason why I specifically picked Tarzan as an example of it being done in an okay manner.
Because it got rid of the racism, and it's like the reboots of Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
Take away the racism, or at least the overt racism, because you can't really get rid of all the racism in Planet of the Apes because it's based on a racist idea. You know, it's how long before orcs are no longer a fantasy character, stock fantasy character, you know? Times change and move on, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think...
Right, guys, I'm only going to open my mic when I've got something to say because I don't have my usual spot and there's background noise going on, so I'm going to mute when I'm not speaking. So.
No, that's fine. Cool.
Yep.
No worries.
You were saying, Chaos?
I think that one of my big gripes with some Disney films, I guess, is the way that it's presented as being representative of the thing behind it. And I don't know that that's even always intentional, but that does sometimes result in people like the thing with assuming Atlantis existed. Of being like, oh, I've been spoon-fed this bit of information, therefore this is the thing. And it doesn't always... And that's not necessarily the fault of Disney. That's a thing that's going to happen with human communication. But it's a thing that bugs me the same way it bugs me that a lot of atheist content creators will package up arguments against God as this definitively does this, even if it's not intentional.
Yeah, and I do think there is an argument to say that children's media spoon feeds ideas.
Yeah.
And that is an issue with children's media in general.
Yeah.
Or at least in widely available, largely uncontroversial children's media.
Yeah, or what I like to call
because we know what happened with Mouse.
Yeah, or what I like to call the difference between children's media and family media.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead and explain the difference for people, because I only recently grasped this nuance, and it is an interesting nuance.
So, basically, what I call so largely children's media and family media can be viewed as essentially the same thing to a casual glance. The difference between what I call children's media and what I call family media is children's media is produced solely with the children in mind and thus only has stuff at a childhood level to spoon feed the plot and themes to the children. Meanwhile, family media will have stuff to keep the adults engaged with the with the story being told. It's media that's, like I said, it basically family media is kids media with the adults also in mind.
Yeah,
So,
Shrek is
family
family.
I was going to say Shrek.
Family media is media that you watch again as an adult and think, how the fuck did I miss that joke?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Shrek in Madagascar.
Yeah, well, another good example. I was thinking about something that essentially on paper is children's stuff, but with sort of adult stuff snuck in there. Noodle and I spent a year and a half covering the Asterix books.
Yeah. Asterix books a parent and child read together. Or the Paddington movies.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of slapstick comedy in the Paddington movies, but there's some quite adult jokes in there as well. And adult commentary going on.
Yeah.
And I think there is a move recently, I think, to over sanitizing family media by trying to make it into children's media.
Yeah.
It's okay to produce something that there's a joke in there that the adults get and the children don't. It is okay that children don't understand every aspect of a piece of media you create.
Or like a great example is the fingerprints joke from Animaniacs.
Yeah. That's mostly.
I'm unfamiliar with that joke. You have to refresh my memory.
So they're doing the short is it in the context. The short is essentially a parody of an Agatha Christie, novel, like Death on the Nile or something like that, right? So, so a murder's been happened, and Yakko says to the others, "I need you to find Prince." And Dot comes back with with the artist formerly known as Prince, and says, "I found him." And then Yakko says, "No, fingerprints." And Dot looks at Prince and says, "I don't think so," and tosses him off to the side.
Yeah, it's the same joke as the shot of the taxi cab on the movie Titanic.
Yeah.
It's the same joke.
Yeah.
It's that kids don't have to get those jokes to enjoy that media, and it keeps the parents interested. You know, if you look at films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, imagine that being made today.
Please, Eddie.
I mean, talk about generational trauma that the shoe.
Mm.
Yeah, I think Kate shared this meme the other day about 80s childhood trauma starter kit, and it had like the shoe and Roger Rabbit and Watership Down and a couple other things. It's like
the Grinch.
Yeah, how to traumatize kids in the 80s.
Yeah.
And actually, fun fact is, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is the only movie in which both Disney and Warner Bros. Characters appear.
Yes, there was two very, very famous scenes with where they had Donald Duck and Daffy Duck and the piano scene in the club.
Yep.
And then
obviously then Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny are when Eddie's
the big one everyone talks about, because it's like Warner's flagship character and Disney's flagship cartoon character in a scene together with the parachute thing. I don't think you want it.
And it's like I do have to. There seems to be, because we seem to be talking about tropes about frightened children. It seems to me, when you take the long-term historical view, the last half a century or so, and I will say, and that is a very loose figure. It's probably more like the last quarter of a century. Seems to be the first time in history where the voices calling for stories to be sanitized to an extent that children are not frightened by them and not challenged by them are louder than the prevailing opinion that stories are there to instruct and occasionally frighten children. That Grimm's fairy tales, Aesop's fables, they're meant to be scary because there are lessons to be learned from that fear. And it seems to me that only in the last quarter of a century or so, really, have the voices that say, no, my little darling can't handle it. How dare you frighten my little darling? You know, my child had nightmares. How dare you? Well, as though parents have no responsibility for monitoring what they show their children. It seems to me only in the last quarter century that I'm not even 30 years old, and when I was a kid, if I watched something, a Disney show or anything, and had nightmares, that was my fault. It wasn't Disney's fault. It wasn't my parents' fault. That was my fault. And yet you see it now. Parents are arguing on Twitter with film producers. You know, the whole thing about trying to take kids to see Deadpool. Do you remember that? And we're expected to cuddle children now, and it seems I don't like the way that's going in general.
I'll give you a couple examples then I can think of. There was a children's TV show in like the early 2000s called Balamori, which was very much directed at children of like under preschoolers. It was very much directed at. But one of the people who was involved in it was a stand-up comedian who played a character on that show, but his actual stand-up act was like adult humor, and he'd always be having to tell the clubs like, no, like these families, like you need to turn them away because what I do on stage is not what you see in Balamori. I do a lot of adults.
The Brawny fandom. You know,
Yeah.
people blaming fans for creating content because they can't be asked making sure their 5-year-old doesn't turn off Safe Search when they Google My Little Pony.
Yeah.
You know, you're a parent. You pushed it out. It's your responsibility to educate it. Do your fucking job.
Well, I'll say the classic example, the film, I will say, and I can't, now, I'm going to say, because memory is a bit of a thing, I'm not entirely sure if it was shown pre-Watershed or whether I was up late that night. I don't remember. But in the 1980s, the BBC aired this movie called Freds, which traumatized me, and to this day I will call it the scariest movie I have ever watched. And it's a depiction of what was the nuclear war. And it's a bit like if I'll get ring. You may remember this. Do you ever remember or hear about a TV movie in America called The Day After?
No.
Which, okay, well, it was a very famous TV movie that aired in America in the 80s called The Day After, which depicted nuclear war and the results of what might happen. Freds is like Britain's way of Freds as a movie was sort of like Britain's way of taking The Day After and saying, "Hold my beer." It was absolutely, even though it's very low budget or whatever, it was a genuinely terrifying. And to this day, it's scared. I'm in my early 40s now. This film traumatizes me. But it is, I think, but in a certain way, I feel better for having watched this movie and being able to take in what it meant. Because it is showing the whole thing of, listen, this is a genuine threat to the world. We must never let this shit happen. But I honestly, I do remember watching that as a child, and I can't remember. Again, my memory's playing tricks on me. Whether it was a pre-Watershed or post-Watershed show that I, for some reason, happened to be up for. I don't remember.
Right. Okay.
You get where I'm coming from on this.
Yeah.
There was a film aired on BBC Two in 2008 at the 9 o'clock watershed. The film was called God on Trial. I've only ever seen that film once.
Is this the Billy Connolly thing?
No.
No, I'm thinking of another thing, okay.
God on Trial was a film based at Auschwitz in which Jews in one of the barracks got together and literally put God on trial for breaking his covenant.
Now I know. I remember what you're talking about. This is a true story.
Watch. It was harrowing. My teachers recommended that we watch that.
Yeah.
My teachers at school recommended we watch that. And I would have been about 15, 16 when that came out.
Yeah.
It was utterly harrowing and heart-wrenching to watch. And I still, if you want to understand the Holocaust, I still say watch that film.
Now you mention that, Noodle, I do remember that now, because that is based on a true story.
It's based on a true story.
Yeah.
And the ending of it is... The ending of it will just destroy you.
Yeah.
One day we will have to do a media music.
Yeah, I think so.
It's an example of that film was after the watershed, which means that the watershed in the UK is basically they don't show anything rated higher than a 15 before the watershed.
Yeah.
Well, higher than the PG, to be honest, before 9 p.m. generally.
Yeah, before 9 p.m. nothing rated higher than a PG goes out on British TV. And then this film, and it was right on the watershed at 9 o'clock as well.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to probably. I don't know if you saw. I made a comment in the chat a bit earlier before I jumped into the stream about when we were talking books and stuff about like because I think you were talking about a bit of media that was censored because of quote unquote colourful language. One book I read at school, and it was part of my English, was a absolutely fantastic book called A Kestrel for a Knave, which had a few swear words in it scattered throughout it. There was an F word here and there. There's a shit or whatever a few times. And yes, there's a bit of a giggly young man and pre-teen guy. You get a little joke, but the whole thing is that book was an absolutely amazing story, which I would recommend to anybody. It's one of my favourite books to this day. And Noodle, have you ever seen the Ken Loach movie, Kes?
I have.
Yes, that is a Kestrel for a Knave is what that was based on.
The point I was making by bringing up that film, God on Trial, is that was recommended essentially to children by teachers.
Yeah.
And that was a film that went out after The Watershed, and my parents didn't know what it was. And it was one of those things you kind of expect that a 15, 16-year-old is going to bed at about 11 o'clock-ish, because that's when all the really gory films come on TV. That's when you get Damien on Film 4 and things, uncut, with the elevator scene and stuff. And the whole thing with that film is, I remember my parents didn't know what it was, but I sat down and I watched it. And I sat down and watched it with my dad. Now, you've got to remember my dad's Polish.
Yeah.
So this was pretty personal for us. And we sat and watched it, and it was such a bonding experience. And I think there are certain things that we have forgotten recently about how important it is to show children these themes and to show them to them in a slightly fictionalized way. And I don't mean to sanitize it and everything else, because God on Trial definitely didn't sanitize it.
Yeah.
But what it did is it presented it in that style of heightened reality of any film that is required due to pacing, etc., and plot issues.
Yeah.
Now,
sorry.
You can say that Disney, when you look at films like Bambi, that deals with the concept of parental death. When you look at films like The Lion King that deal with issues around being a refugee. When you look at films like, all these Disney films, they had truths to them.
Yeah.
And I think there is a thing to say that maybe the generation who were traumatized by those films don't want their kids to be traumatized by them. And that's not a bad thing. But if you sit down and have these conversations with your children, which is what I have maintained while we did the Asterix streams, sit down and have these difficult conversations with your children. Be a fucking parent. Then there is nothing wrong with showing these things to kids. But you have to parent them alongside.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, Noodle and I, when we did those streams, this is something that came up on a number of occasions, and we had this conversation that, yes, there were certain things within those books that are problematic, but is it really the right approach to just shield people from those books, or oh, okay, let's read this, and then let's talk about why these certain things in this are wrong. And there was a very good article, I think, written in the New York Times about this, like problematic children's media, like Asterix or Tintin, with like, should we say, racist depictions of characters and so on. How do you approach that? There was a very good article about, okay, let's let them read the media, but then read or consume this piece of media, but then at the same time, let's have a conversation about why this is problematic. I think that's a good thing. So I think we've got into a stage where there's a certain tendency, I feel, to
Coddle.
I guess one coddle and shield children from certain things, which is no, it's the intentions behind it are noble, but at the same time, it's kind of, it's, don't do it to a point where you where you try to deny that really bad stuff doesn't happen, and so that children have, so as a young age, I think, people, I do feel, need to, so actually maybe no, actually, the world isn't always a nice place.
Yeah, and I think there's an argument for saying as well, and obviously I'm not a parent, so my judgment is, take it however you want to take it. There is also an argument that parents are fucking lazy. They think they can put the kids in front of a screen and it'll raise the kid for them.
Yeah.
And you had you created a human life. You have a responsibility, and parents don't want to deal with that responsibility. And I think there is definitely space to be saying, just because you can't be asked sitting down and explaining something to your child, be it something scary, be it the way Disney basically spent 50 years telling young girls they could either be a princess or a witch, and that was it.
Or
be it black people and people of colour being turned into animals, be it, any of those other problematic tropes that we know from Disney. Be a parent and fucking explain that shit to your child.
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit like I made a bit of it might be a bit of a bad joke maybe earlier in the chat, but it was a quote by Glenn Danzig from the band The Misfits of it said, Disney teaches you to hate your stepmother, where Pornhub maybe suggests something else, So it's not a great joke, but that's a trope. That's the whole trope with Disney, the evil stepmother, which I know kind of comes from fairy tales kind of thing, but
if you're not, Max just said something interesting in the chat. If you're not educating your child, they're going to pick it up in the playground.
Yeah.
They'll hear it from somewhere.
Yeah, like there's such a thing as being traumatized by being over sheltered. Talking from experience.
Yep.
In some ways, absolutely yes.
Yeah.
And
go on, Chaos.
Had my parents, bothered to explain what sex was to me, maybe it wouldn't have been this whole thing when I found out what sex was, that I now know this information, and I now know they've hidden it from me, and I suddenly have even more trust issues.
Yes, because you no longer trust your parents. And you kind of have to as well. I had this conversation with, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying their name because it is publicly visible on Twitter. I had this conversation where I said, Why is your child's innocence more important than the innocence of the children who lived through these atrocities? In reference to the mouse case, but it's also kind of applicable to Disney stories, because Disney stories teach children about these very serious issues in an accessible way. Why is your child's innocence so much more important than the lesson they should learn from it? And the truth of the matter is that the only justification, potential justification, that holds any kind of water is, I can't be bothered explaining this to my child. Because if you truly wanted to protect your child, if you truly wanted your child to go into the world prepared to deal with the world, you would want your child to know these things.
Yeah.
There's a reason everyone talks about, we learn about death from Disney. We learned about Mufasa and Bambi's mum. How many of us, because of that experience as children, had we not had that experience, if you've ever lost a parent, it's not the same. It's nowhere near the same. But you almost have something akin to a framework to apply to it from those early formative memories of watching these films.
Yeah.
And I will say something there. You mentioned Bambi. I can remember when I was a kid, there was a period in the early 1980s where Disney, all of the Disney films, to say the classic ones like Snow White, Pinocchio, the Fantasia, whatever, all got re-released at the cinema. And I do remember my mum taking me to watch Bambi. And it was possibly my first exposure to, real exposure to the concept of death or losing a parent.
Yeah, and that's what children's media does. It creates a safe, controlled environment for children to explore these big feelings in a way their parents can manage, and teach them how to manage these feelings on a smaller scale to essentially, if you like, vaccinate them against going through it as adults.
Yeah.
If you like, I use the analogy of vaccines because it's a small dose of it as a child, so you don't get it and it doesn't kill you as an adult. You know?
Yeah, I think there's. I think there's value to it. There's definite value to this stuff. I mean, look, I know I made this sort of joke in the chat earlier about Bambi, because there was a bit of a meme going around of like from a couple of years ago. This is, what if Christopher Nolan directed Bambi? And they're obviously mixing in quotes from like the Dark Knight trilogy or whatever, and saying, "This man killed my parents. I cannot let that stand." That kind of, those sort of things. But yeah, I mean, I would say Bambi was my first time I honestly really thought about the concept of death, let alone the death of a parent, but death in general. And I don't think and in a certain way, I think it was healthy. Even though it was a bit hard for me as a kid, I think in the long run, it was healthy for me to actually understand this concept.
Well, that's the thing. That's the role of a parent, to teach you how to manage the difficult times as an adult. If you can't deal with things as an adult, your parents have failed you.
Yeah,
there's no two ways about you being failed if you cannot deal with these basic problems.
And I get it. I think it's a fine balancing art as a parent. I can totally understand. It's a fine balancing art as a parent, where you want to protect your child from being hurt in a lot of ways. I get it, but also you do need to let them know maybe, hey, life isn't always great. Bad stuff happens, and with my own family, and this is only going back, and I'm in my early 40s now, I'm only talking about 5 years ago or so. It's like my mum really desperately tried to stop me from going to the hospital when my grandmother was dying. She just did not want me to see it. And I had to sort of argue, no, I have to go and say goodbyes and whatever to my grandmother. And even though, it was, and I understood why she did not want me to see that. Seeing my grandmother in that state, because it was hard. It was hard. And I understand why she was like, Jeff, I don't want you to go there and see this. I understood that, but I'm like, but I feel I have to. Like, I'm an adult now. I've got to see this.
Yeah. I remember being about 8 years old, and my dad's aunt died. My great aunt died, basically like my second grandmother. And I remember being in the car on the drive, on the way to see her in the intensive care ward where she was dying, and my parents having this conversation with me of, Noodle, she's going to have a lot of pipes coming out of her and she's not going to look well, and there's going to be a drip and there might be machines, but it's all right. They're there to keep her healthy and they're there to help her, and she's not in any pain, and having those really important conversations with me.
Yeah.
And you again, parents, it's a balancing act. No one's saying it's not. But, again, I would question anyone who would say that they don't want their child, or they want their child. Yes, let kids be kids to an extent.
Yeah.
But again, this is why the analogy of vaccines works so well. Kids don't like vaccines. They're needles. They hurt. They sometimes make you feel ill for a few days. Most of us, I would hope, on this stream and in our thing would say, I would still give my kid their standard round of vaccines.
Yeah.
Because I know that, yes, there's a little bit of...
No, I'm with Joe Rogan on this, sorry.
But, it's going to prepare them as an adult to make sure they don't get polio, measles, mumps, rubella, shingles, these terrible diseases that can, cripple and disable and kill you. And, and it's like, maybe that's the role Disney needs to get back to. Because the modern films with Disney, there is this kind of lack of darker, like really dark themes that we had in the classic age of Disney. But and I think those films will always have a place for the reason of they're an accessible way to introduce people to those themes that are very important. Like I love the fact that Disney has gotten really modern and has started having Disney princesses and characters who are not white. Because when I was the age group target for Disney, the only non-white character was Pocahontas.
And she was...
Which I referenced earlier in the chat, by the way.
Before and 9 kinds of problematic.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I loved Pocahontas because she was the only Disney princess that looked anything like me. That wasn't wrong of me as a child. I was looking for something to identify with.
No, it's not. It's not wrong. But as you said earlier, Noodle, one of perhaps the good things about something like that is that, hey, look, as bad as whatever is that, all the problems you could bring up with that movie, and because I sort of said in the chat, I actually told my ex-girlfriend the true story of Pocahontas, Rebecca Rolfe, who's buried in Gravesend in England, and there wasn't the great love story of between her and John Smith, and it would have been bloody creepy if there was, honestly, if you consider the ages involved. But The point being is that's, yes, I may have destroyed her childhood, but in a certain way, she was kind of interested when I started telling her the real story of what happened with the Powhatan Native Americans and so on. It can be a good, intro, even if it's a very sanitized, happy kind of version of something. It can lead you into wanting to investigate a certain subject a bit more. And I've brought this up with Noodle. We did all those Asterix streams together. My interest in Roman history literally came off of the Asterix books. Made me want to read. He actually made me want to read some real history about the Roman Empire and stuff. In this respect,
tangential learning is a thing.
Yeah, like I remember when I first read the Harry Potter books. The reason I wanted to learn to read Latin and pronounce Latin was because some of the spells didn't seem to make sense.
Okay. Harry Potter is a fan fiction in the 1986 movie Troll. Fight me.
I've never seen Troll, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, okay. Well, the main character in it is a teenage wizard called by the name of Harry Potter, by the way.
Oh,
so,
yeah. No,
okay.
Yeah. No, but let's be honest, 99.8% of Western literature is basically Bible fan fiction in some way, shape, or form, or allegory, or metaphor, or something. 99.8% of English literature wouldn't exist without the King James Bible because we wouldn't have a standardized language.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some are more blatant than others, Lewis.
I still don't like your Magic Jesus lion. I still hold that Tolkien didn't like that. The reason Tolkien didn't like allegory wasn't in spite of his friendship with Lewis, it was because of his friendship with Lewis.
Probably.
Yeah, that would have put me off for life as well, having to listen to that guy. It's like, from Jesus to Neo, we have a 2,000-year canon of individualistic, chosen one messianic figures in literature and in media.
Yeah.
That's an unbroken line. And they all, and how you receive one impacts how you receive the others.
And the only
we are designed to recognize patterns.
And the only one that was ever done correctly was someone called Brian.
We are all individuals.
I'm not.
It's. But yeah, the reason I went off on all that big tangent and mentioned God on Trial and everything else is because I was sort of coming to this whole thing of, we had the conversation on Twitter, and I had the conversation with a few people about how the classic Disney princesses are problematic as fuck.
Yeah.
Growing up as a non-white girl, I didn't have a Disney princess to look up to.
Yeah.
Growing up as someone not entrenched in that very English, very American culture, I didn't see my stories being told on screen. If I wanted to see a story about my people told on screen, I had to go watch Cool Runnings.
Yeah.
Or if I saw people like me on screen, they were conflated with animals, or they were mystical characters who weren't necessarily relevant to the plot. And they were very two-dimensional. You talk about Disney and fat phobia, how there was a period where the villains were all fat, you know, or you talk about Disney and, you know, ableism, and you talk about the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And Disney's got its issues. But again, and I think this is my takeaway, having thought about this for several weeks and ruminated on this, knowing this stream was coming.
Yeah.
For me, Disney is what it is. Disney is a product of the culture it's been released into. It has to be, because like all other profit-driven enterprises, if it wasn't, it wouldn't turn a profit.
Yeah.
Ergo, it is far more representative of the values of the culture it's been presented to than anything else. We must bear that in mind, but we must then also understand that if we're going to do that, we have to be able to have those conversations with the children it's been targeted at.
Especially since, at least, you know, in the section of, you know, in the quote-unquote Western world, Disney is the prime shaper of culture when it comes to what children are consuming.
Yeah. And Disney isn't just a shaper. Disney feeds off the dominant cultural discourse.
Yeah.
Disney is never going to create something that they're going to run at a loss unless they're after a tax dodge.
Yeah.
You know, we've all seen the producers. We all know how that goes.
They haven't really done that since the 1980s, when they really, to be honest.
Exactly. So, you know, and it's
and ironically, like some of the films they made big losses on, I think were some of the best ones, like Tron, you know, which I love that movie, but the movie was a flop financially.
But but as with all publications in all media, people don't like to be challenged. They particularly don't like children's media that challenges, because it means they have to sit and listen to the whiny little brat they created. And let's be honest, until the Industrial Revolution, parents made a point of spending as little time as possible with their children until they were adults.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know, where possible.
Can I give a quote by the comedian Mark Steele, who I think summarised this very well. That when you're young, a child or whatever, and I think you all of us can relate to this when we're really young children. We're always asked, we have a lot of questions like, oh, how does that work? Why does this happen? Why, you know, where do we get this from? We're all very enthusiastic about wanting to find this stuff out, and then, you know, the parents are like, bloody hell, when he stop asking questions about all this stuff, we'll send him to school, that'll sort them out. You know, there's a joke of that, but that's this thing when you know, when you can cast your minds back to that as a young child. If you've been around a young child who's will ask you these kind of questions about, oh, why does this happen? Oh, what's this? Whatever. It may be, and I'm not a parent. I don't have any practical experiences really with doing this, but I almost feel maybe this is not the point where you shut the conversation down when the kids are asking you these things, or at least don't do it all the time.
Especially if your child is neurodivergent, because, again, speaking from experience, they will find the answers.
They will find the answer you don't like.
And though that's also probably part of the reason for this, big, conservative backlash against woke Disney.
Yeah, and I mean, I can say, yes, Disney represents the culture it's into. Disney requires adult engagement with their children. That doesn't negate the damage of decades of Disney where girls were taught you have to be skinny, pretty, and white to do anything with your life. And then basically the only thing you're going to do is marry a man, sit down, shut up, and pump out babies. Yeah. That doesn't negate the damage that was done, but that was the dominant cultural discourse at the time. As we saw third wave feminism in the 70s and 80s, that's when you started to slowly see changes coming through. And especially children's media is very, very conservative. So I am not surprised that children's media is 30 years behind the dominant cultural discourse. Because guess what age people start having kids who were old enough to have these kind of, to watch these kind of things. If you think about it, you got 1970s, let's say take 1970 for the ease of figures. Like someone born in 1970 at the height of third wave feminism.
Yeah.
It's post Dr. King. They don't know a world of that different level of racism and everything else. So they have different expectations of their media. But they are being raised with the media that their parents find acceptable.
Yeah.
They then hit their teenage years and rebel against that, because all teenagers do.
Yeah.
And they become more progressive within their own time. They then hit their 20s and have children. And by their late 20s, approximately 30 years after that cultural revolution they were born into, the media that they are then able to show their own children is representative of those ideas. Do you see why it takes a little bit longer? Disney markets primarily to parents, not to children. Kids don't have disposable income.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, to bring up an example of this that's related to Encanto, actually, one of the characters, Luisa, is a very buff lady. And so, do you want to know what Disney did in terms of merch? They made less forms of merch and set up less production lines of merch for her than for her pretty feminine sister.
But she's now disappearing off the shelves because she's something new.
And Luisa has been consumed by, I think it was an order of magnitude higher than her pretty traditional sister.
Because we live in that era where girls can now be loud and, you know, for example, like I've seen images of that character. I've not seen the film. Yeah. If you'd have released that character in the 90s, no one would have let kids watch that, because they'd have said, she's a lesbian, you can't show that to girls. They'll go out and they'll never marry a man. That's what would have been said in the 90s if you'd have released that.
Yeah.
They'd have said she looks like a lesbian and all you'd have got is lesbian jokes. But now we're in an era where the people having young kids in their late 20s, our age, are aware of issues around being transgender. We're aware of gender differences. We're aware of sexism. We're aware of the fact that not all lesbians are butch. We know this, and we're willing to allow our children to see those things. Ergo, Disney pitches to us and what we find acceptable for our children.
Actually, though, I don't think Disney's as caught up as they'd like to think, though, because
no, they're not as caught up as they'd like to think. They never are, but they're getting
there. The producers had to actively fight with some of the higher ups at Disney in order for that character to be allowed to be that muscular. Like, they nearly got fired over it and shit.
Yeah. But again, the executives have been in the job 30 years. They're still thinking about The Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
They're still on that track.
Yeah.
You know? And that's another element of why these things take time to develop in media. And that's why children's media is so conservative, because it's always 30 years behind, because it's always geared towards the parents and what the parents find acceptable for the children to watch.
Well, I guess this goes into kind of a question about media in general, of Does it, does it sometimes this media, is it changing to reflect society, and then, but maybe on certain occasions it triggers the change?
Yes.
The question I'd like to throw out there.
Both is good.
Yes, both. Both is good.
Do you want the academic answer or the flippant answer?
Well,
Either answer's fine. Either answer's fine, Noodle. I'm just fascinated by this question.
I think me and Chaos already gave the flippant answer of both is good.
Yeah, the flippant answer is a circle has no beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much, I am very much in the camp of, it can both be a catalyst of change, and sometimes it reflects change.
Yeah,
and reflects a mirror back on society, and I think, but it's but it's a good, interesting question.
Comes from being reactive.
Yeah.
Occasionally, you do get films who shift the paradigm, who shift the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are once in a while there are these massive films that no one expects, and they start a conversation, and they lead to change. We talked about when we did Black Panther, how that started a real conversation about the representation of African Americans on film.
I think,
there's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B going on always with anything. But again, with children's media, it's always going to be more conservative because it is always reacting to the parents and the parents' sensibilities. It's going to try and be progressive because it's trying to appeal to progressive parents and young parents. However, it will still always err on the side of caution, as will any enterprise that is primarily profit-driven. Because controversy, in children's media specifically, controversy does not do well. Children's media does best when it is not controversial. If children's media is controversial, it causes problems.
Any press is good press does not apply to kids' media.
It does not apply to children's media. Adult media, yes, because adults will watch anything if they've been made curious enough. But children's media, if adults, parents especially, if they hear, oh, this is controversial for X, Y, and Z reason, a lot of parents will just shut that down and say, no, I don't want my kid watching that. That is lost revenue. It is lost audience. And it's losing future sales as well, because then the children aren't ingratiated into being recipients of the output. And Ring is pointing at themselves. The fact that Ring has never seen Hercules because Ring was, there's certain films Ring couldn't see, probably says it all. It's a prime example of that.
Yeah, I couldn't
That's why children's media is largely conservative.
Yeah.
Because parents...
I think the other thing is conservative parents won't take their kids to see more liberal films, but more liberal parents will take their kids to see conservative films.
Yes, exactly. Because liberal parents are willing to have those conversations with their children. Conservative parents, not so much. They're a bit more spare the rod, spoil the child.
Also, conservative...
In very general terms. Conservative, small c.
I'm speaking from experience on the other end. Conservative parents are more concerned about media propagandizing to their kids in the correct way.
Yeah. In the way that appeals to their sensibilities. And so in order to cast that broad net of appealing to the widest range of sensibilities as possible, you go conservative, knowing that the liberal parents will educate their child and the conservative parents will sit them down in front of it and go off and make a cup of tea.
Yeah.
or whatever it is they do. I'm sure conservative parents take an interest in their kids, but maybe they'll teach them a Bible verse afterwards to cleanse them or something. I don't know how conservative parents do it.
Though I will say, this trend is a lot more this trend is more on the cinematic side of things, considering on how cinematic media is monetized as opposed to television. Children's media for television, or at least in the US, does skew more riskier and more progressive than cinematic children's media.
Okay. In the US, that is a very American phenomenon. Like, I grew up in the 90s. My dad still says that what America is good at is children's programming, Sesame Street, things like that.
Yeah.
America is very good at that. Do that specific thing in children's media.
Well, I'm going to defend Sesame Street on the basis.
No, I am defending it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Sesame Street. What I'm saying is America is very good at producing that and educating children in that way.
Yeah.
British children's media is more conservative.
Yeah.
And is as conservative as Disney in a lot of ways. And British media in general is more conservative. But again, a lot of it is going to be different in different cultures as well. What's acceptable in one culture is not in another. We tend to lump America and Britain together because we have that shared language and shared history.
Yeah.
But we're not the same.
Sorry, I was just going to make a joke because this meme's been going around the internet a little bit recently with the Sesame Street with Elmo and Rocco.
Yeah, Elmo and the Rock, yeah.
Elmo and the Rock is like, why tell Elmo? Rocco's just the Rock. So that sad moment when you realise that Elmo from Sesame Street is better at philosophical concepts than R and Ra. It's a bit of a sad moment as an atheist.
If you look at that Sesame Street, how brilliant that shot that is, right?
Yeah.
That short clip in Sesame Street where Elmo turns to someone and says, "But that's a rock," and they say, "Yes, but." What's that teaching kids? In a very short clip, you've got it teaching kids the difference between fiction and reality.
Yeah.
You've got it teaching kids kindness. Okay, some people aren't as developmentally forward as you are. You must be kind.
And
it's
you've got them
teaching
kids
to share.
Yeah.
And more importantly,
teaching them humour.
Yeah.
All at the same time. That's what I mean by America is brilliant at children's programming.
And more importantly, it's got them teaching that rocks are not atheists.
Yeah, but it's also teaching them a straight fact at the same time. But it's doing it in a way that's accessible and brilliant. And you don't need to discuss that with a child because it's Sesame Street and it's done all that legwork for you.
Yeah.
Disney isn't doing that legwork. And, at the end of the day, right, I know parenting's hard. I know it is. There's a reason I don't want kids. I know parenting's hard. I can barely keep a plant alive, never mind a human being.
Yeah.
But maybe stop and think before you have a child. Do you have the resources, emotional, mental, fiscal, time, educational, to create a well-rounded human being? And consider that before you decide to throw the condoms out.
Yeah.
No one put a gun to your head and forced you to have a child. So be a parent. Frankly, I think I keep repeating that. I think that's going to be my sum up.
I mean, in some states they did put a legislative gun to your head and forced you to keep it to term.
Yeah, I think honestly, but maybe this is not a rabbit hole we need to go down.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, largely, people have a very, there are for the majority of people, having a child was a freely made choice.
Yeah.
And therefore, you must be prepared for the consequences of that choice and the responsibilities of that choice.
Yeah.
Because, you had children's media that taught you that. So why didn't you listen? Uncle Ben taught you that. Why didn't you pay attention?
Yeah.
And it's, America does children's media really well. And I keep saying this because it's true. Sesame Street and all the other ones.
Well, it does. I mean, you brought up Sesame Street. I mean, Sesame Street as a children's show, I think it may very well have been the first show to do this, where I feel like if you watch that, it's actually talking to children rather than at them.
Yes.
Do you get what I'm saying?
And, part of that was, Jim Henson and the Muppet, because, Jim, the people behind the Muppets were also the people behind Sesame Street.
Yeah, the Muppets.
Jim Henson. Yeah.
Talk about Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
These shows that talk to children, not at them, and really educate them. Those are good shows to sit your kid in front of for an hour if you want a break.
Yeah.
But again, as a parent, you have to watch what your kids are being exposed to and be prepared to have the hard conversations with them. If you're going to sit them down in front of Bambi, you better be prepared for a week of nightmares and crying. Responsibilities, consequences.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it's like I said, like I said earlier, that the movie Bambi was my first exposure to death as a concept.
It is
and I hadn't really thought about. I hadn't even. Yeah, okay. I maybe knew that people died or whatever, but I hadn't really conceptualized it. And the movie Bambi did, actually kind of put the concept of death. It's like, made me think, how would it make me feel if, like, my mother died for some whatever reason?
The Lion King was my big first exposure to death.
Yeah.
The Fox and the Hound is a great example of an accessible way you can teach children about racism and segregation and cultural differences.
Yeah.
That film broke me as a child because I saw in that film experiences that I didn't have the words for, but that I was living through. I'm not like you, I'm better than you, or, this, that, and the other. Class, there's a lot of applications for things like that. And it is kids, there's this thing of, kids first see death when their first gerbil dies or when they see a Disney film. But there will be kids out there at 4, 5 years old whose parents have died. It's a sad fact of life. And as much as these films educate those of us who were lucky enough not to be in that situation, they also help the children who are in that situation process them in a safe, stable, controlled way. And that's really important as well.
Yeah. And a little bit of a fact check from Ox. Thank you.
Yep. And so, I have great respect for the American children's programming industry in general.
Yeah.
it has its issues, like talking vegetables people, really. But
hey, that's not children's programming. That's children's propaganda.
Yeah. But you cannot deny the impact of children's programming in America on the rest of the world. Like, would we have in Britain? Would we have Balamori? Would we have had Toast TV? Would we have even had the Teletubbies if it wasn't for Sesame Street?
Well,
I
mean, obviously Britain's got its own traditional children's TV, going back to stuff like Watch with Mother, that sort of thing, with like Bill and Ben, the Flower Pot Men, and Andy Pandy, those sort of things. And Captain Pugwash, all that sort of stuff. That it had its own. Britain had its own, but I don't think those things ever did anything where they were really. I think they were. Yeah, they were fun things, but they weren't. They weren't really. I don't necessarily know they were necessarily giving you any life lessons in any of it.
Like, could you imagine the Wombles doing an episode on losing a parent?
Yeah.
You know, or Tops TV doing an episode
actually, the Wombles possibly. The Wombles possibly, I'll say that. But,
yes, but not in the same way something like Sesame Street would do it.
Oh, no.
It wouldn't have the same impact.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't do this. It wouldn't have the same educational value. American children's media, I will say it again, is brilliant because it teaches children before they even understand that they're learning.
Yeah.
And I think, therefore, that is why there is a place, as out of date as they are, as progressively more and more dated and problematic we are going to find the classic Disney era. Those films will always have a place because there will always be conversations to be had that need to be had with children. And it's the same conversations, quite frankly, that you should be having with your children about books like Mouse.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go into, like, say, classic Disney area, the whole thing, like, I mean, the big trope of Pinocchio with nose growing any time he tells a lie. I mean, there is the kind of whole thing of, you know, I suppose there's a message being sent of it's better to be honest, kind of thing being sent there.
Well, and you know, Pinocchio, the book, you know, the actual like book was.
Well, yeah, the actual fairy. Yeah, the actual fairy.
Well, was written as a morality play.
Yeah. And I think, you know, and as there is no taking away from the fact that there will be generations who really struggle with Disney and who really feel left behind by the output of Disney in the era when they were the target audience. And yes, Disney is a profit-driven enterprise, but there is a place for it within, as part of raising a healthy, well-adjusted, well-educated child. And maybe when you sit down with your kid in 2022 and watch The Little Mermaid and watch Snow White and watch, you know, any other of those classic films, that's when to have the conversations of, you understand that there were times when, you know, it was acceptable to make jokes about little people and it was acceptable to put them on the edge of society where no one knew who they were. But that's not acceptable anymore, and this is why. You know, it was acceptable to tell people that a prince would come and kiss them in their sleep. But if anyone kisses you when you don't want them to, I want you to tell me. You can have those conversations with children, and Disney's very accessible for that.
Well, can I ask a question? Okay, I'm going to throw to the panel here, and I don't think any of us on the panel are parents, as far as I know.
No.
But could we?
Not in a way that's relevant to this anyway.
Well, but let's just imagine. I'm just asking, can we imagine for a moment we are parents and we have children? I want to go around the room here and maybe ask this question. Do you show your kids classic Disney films, yes or no? Ring, what do you think?
I think it depends on the film. Now here's why. Now, a lot of the earlier, classic Disney animated films were still in the era of it's entertaining because the colored pictures are moving. So in some of them there are a lot of sequences that a particularly young kid would just get bored of and walk away from. I remember.
Noodle, throw the question for you.
With regards to, would I not show my child something because of a theme or because of a certain content in the vein of what we're discussing now? No.
Yeah.
Because I would hope that if I am devoutly child-free. I am not interested in having a child. Yeah. If I had a child, I would hope, and, if I ever do, which, again, not likely, but I would hope I would be parent enough and I would have the foresight enough to have these conversations with that child in an age-appropriate way.
Yeah.
And to an extent, you can let kids be kids as well and just enjoy things and then have those conversations later as well and use them as building off points. You don't have to have them as the film's going on. But I think, as Ring said, there are some things kids are just going to find boring. Like, I was born in the 90s, and to this day, I haven't seen the full thing of Mickey Mouse on the Steamboat because I took one look at it as a kid and it was flickery and it was grey and what? And I wasn't interested. So,
yeah, my dad loved Fantasia. I still haven't seen it all the way through.
I'll just say, okay, cool. I'll just say, Noodle, before I throw it open to Chaos. Yeah, the Mickey Mouse on the Steamboat thing is very difficult to look on with like fresh eyes. I think it's probably one of those things that at the time is mind blowing, but to us nowadays, it's like meh. So what, But I think at the time, it was probably very very Chaos. Do you like to do your opinion on that question? Hypothetically speaking, you were a parent. Would you show your child classic Disney movies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that depending on certain Disney movies, like Fantasia, for example, I don't think I would show Fantasia to a younger child, but I would still show it to my child as, this is a thing I watched when I was growing up. I want you to have an understanding of the media I have consumed as well, so that you can think critically about my opinions. So even if I didn't show it to them as a kid, I would still want them to see it.
Now, since we're talking about Fantasia,
can I answer my own question second round? Okay. As I've asked this question, I'll answer this myself. Yes, if I was the parent I would not object to showing my child a lot of classic Disney era. I'd want to have, but at the same time, maybe with a lot of things, I'd like to have a little conversation afterwards about some of the meaning behind stuff. I don't think there's anything. There's really nothing harmful in my mind that I can think of with showing a kid something like Snow White, Bambi. Bambi. Sometimes you have the conversation. Is it Fantasia, Pinocchio, Dumbo, whatever it might be. I really feel it's actually very harmless. But there might be things about that where you could have a conversation with kids about this. That's my 2 cents. Anyway, Chaos, I cut you off.
You just made me think. Sorry, I would add the caveat. I would show the child them and have the conversations. I wouldn't necessarily show them it at the target age for the film. So I wouldn't, for example, show them Dumbo at 3 years old. I'd probably wait till they were 5 or 6, maybe 7, and they were that little bit older and could have that in-depth conversation.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'd show it to them when they were really young, but then show it them again a bit later and use that as the jumping off point for the conversations. Make it age appropriate.
Oh, sorry.
That, I mean the conversations you're having, not necessarily the film.
Sorry, actually, Noodle, you just jogged my memory. The crows in Dumbo, you just jogged my memory about that, and maybe that could, okay.
And those are conversations to be having. You have the conversation with a kid at 2, 3 years old, and you say, "We don't say this anymore, or we don't do that anymore because it's not nice." You then, when they watch it again at 7 or 8, you say, "We don't do this anymore because there is a historical basis for what this meant. It meant this. And do you understand now why this is a bad thing?" And you do that within a holistic environment of showing the child other more progressive media. I wouldn't, for example, show a child Dumbo or even The Lion King. I wouldn't show them The Lion King with a very unsubtle racial undertone of The Lion King without also potentially having my 8 or 9-year-old reading Anne Frank, reading Mouse, reading, the books about slavery, seeing documentaries on TV. It would all be part of that wider education.
Now,
because I wasn't quite finished with everything I thought there, but it was kind of I said all of that about, as a blanket, I would at least eventually, when I thought they were old enough to understand why, if I hadn't chosen to show them something earlier, even if it's just, I'd have thought you'd have found this boring.
Yeah.
With Disney films in particular, I think that most of them, while I wouldn't necessarily show them at the same age as I was shown them, I think there's an order of introducing them. I would still, by and large, be like, let's watch The Lion King. Maybe let's have a conversation afterwards, or in a couple of years, or whatever. But let's still watch The Lion King. Let's still have the emotional experience of Simba dying. Not Simba dying, Mufasa dying.
Mufasa dying. And let's talk about what that means. And let's talk about why Mummy and Daddy are not going to die. And why, it's okay for these things to frighten you and to be sad when someone dies.
Yeah.
And you can have that conversation with a 3-4-year-old. And put it in that kind of context. And, if you're a parent, that's the responsibility you signed up for.
And remember, the past can hurt, but you can either run from it or you can learn from it.
Exactly. And actually, that's a really nice, just overarching comment on Disney.
Yeah. Too bad Disney's spending all of its time running from it instead of learning from it. Cough Fantasia, cough all the other films that are locked up in the Disney vault, never to be seen from again.
Oh, they'll be released eventually.
Song of the South.
Not something I would show a child, but something I would possibly show an 11,
something
12-year-old.
that Disney is never going to release.
Yes, but that's because Disney's
Cough, Education for Deaf.
Yeah.
Disney cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
But like,
again, but as a parent, why are you relying entirely on Disney? There's other things you can show a kid as well.
But because apparently there are sequences in Fantasia that were also heavily edited because the original footage was not very it was not good.
I can believe that.
Yeah, but this is the whole thing about. Yes, there is an element of shame that they ever created anything like that.
Yeah.
But I think there is a lesson to be taught to children that it's okay to be ashamed of the past.
Yeah.
It's okay to grow up and look back and be embarrassed.
Yeah.
Or ashamed. Because that means you've grown. And that's definitely a conversation you should be having with children.
Yeah. Though I've said it before and I'll say it again. I definitely prefer the Warner Brothers method as opposed to the Disney method. You know, the Disney method being lock it away and pretend it never happened, while the Warner Brothers method is release it with a disclaimer saying it was made at,
Yeah. And the thing is, media that has staying power.
Yeah.
That doesn't fade into obscurity. By definition, will be relevant while it's still being watched. So if it's not relevant anymore, if it's not being watched anymore, you can watch it as a sort of historical exercise, but why would you, you're not going to show... I'm not going to have the same conversation with a kid about Frozen and responsibilities and having power as I'm going to have with a kid about Simba's responsibility to the Outlanders in The Lion King, even though it's largely the same concept, because it's different times and different presentations.
Yeah.
So, it's... Things come from their time, and it's, as I said right at the start, it's really important to contextualize things in their time. And if you're not able to do that, if you are not able to sit down with a child and hand them a book or a film or anything else and say to them, look, this is a thing that exists. This is a thing that has existed since a time when XYZ was acceptable and isn't anymore because we have learned since then. However, it's really important you understand what those times were like, so you understand that we shouldn't ever go back to a time like that. Those are conversations to be having.
Yeah. Now...
And those conversations are age appropriate to any age.
Now, I am going to say something very controversial, and that would appear to be against the very thesis of Media Musings as a series. But if your purpose was to make a shot-for-shot sanitization of an earlier piece of media, maybe you shouldn't make that update.
What is the purpose of that update?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you especially if you did a theatrical re-release that nearly broke box office records for a second time.
Mm.
I'm sorry. We're talking about Disney. I had to fire the shot at the live action remakes.
Yeah, the live action remakes are an irritant to me.
Yeah.
I've not watched any of them, and I don't intend to.
I haven't watched any of them. I've heard good things about the Jungle Book, but I've not watched it. Lion King, I've heard nothing but bad things about that. But I mean, I would say like the first movie I ever watched that I can actually remember watching was when my mum took me to the cinema to watch Disney's Jungle Book, the old animated version. With the story. I think that is the first film I ever went to the cinema and watched, and the first film I can really remember watching.
My first one was The Little Mermaid.
And maybe I haven't I have not watched the Jungle Book in like years or whatever. But I don't know. Do you know there's certain things where I have memories of my childhood that I don't want to ruin, kind of thing.
I'm going to say the most 90s sentence ever, possibly 80s. My Tamagotchi died while we went to see The Little Mermaid.
That is so 90s. That is so 90s.
That is my first memory of going to the cinema. It was to see The Little Mermaid, and my Tamagotchi died halfway through.
Is that a 90s thing?
Oh, chaos. We'll have to educate you on Tamagotchis.
Guys, I'm asking because I had Tamagotchis at 10.
Yes, no, Tamagotchis have been around since the late 80s. I think.
One of my question was, you presented it as like a 90s thing, and I was like, but they existed until like the late 2000s.
Yeah, no, but it's the combination of Tamagotchis, Little Mermaid, going to the cinema to see it.
Point being, they were a big thing in the 90s, though.
They were massive.
Yeah. Not my confusion is it felt like one of those ones where it's like one of those posts of only 90s kids will remember these things, and then it's shit that we had in 2007.
Yes, the reason for that is because that shit's been re-released in 2007. That's the problem.
Sometimes
I've noticed this. Toys that were new when I was a kid. Pop-Up Pirate, the snot game where you pulled the snot out of the nose. Operation. Games that were novelty and being advertised when I was a kid are being advertised again now.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, Twister was such a 90s game. And it's been advertised again. Spin the Bottle, so 90s. Could you get much more 90s than Spin the Bottle?
Yeah.
And kids are getting into it again. The 80s saw the Ouija board. It's been released again. And it's,
I think one of my things
they sell the same toys to kids every other generation.
I think one of my things is literally just that I've never seen an only 90s kids would understand post that I didn't understand at least 3/4 of.
Are you old enough to actually remember owning Pokemon cards?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I thought Pokemon cards died in like 1997.
I've been I played Pokemon cards like 2 weeks ago.
Or Pogs.
Pogs, yes, I am. I do remember Pogs as well.
Yeah. Or Polly Pocket.
Oh, Polly Pocket,
I remember Polly Pocket.
I do. I remember that.
And these were things that were around when I was a kid, and yet, you remember them as well, Chaos. They come in cycles. And that's all Disney's doing. It's doing the same thing the toy industry does and the fashion industry does, just recycling it and adding some new bells and whistles.
Now,
And that's why I'm not all that keen on Disney live action remakes.
Now, I will. Okay, so. Now, the Jungle Book live action remake is the only one that I've actually seen. Oh, I mean, I have seen Maleficent, but that
one thing. When we say live action, are we talking about CGI that's so good it looks real? Or are we talking about movies with actual human beings in them? Because those are two very different things.
Mowgli was actually played by an actor.
Against a green screen.
Yeah. Okay, so live action in big air quotes.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm back.
The same way that the Lion King was live action in air quotes.
Yeah. So the only live action remake I've seen, admittedly, is, aside from Maleficent, the 2016 Jungle Book. And I will defend that. And I will defend that particular one to the death, because instead of doing a shot-for-shot remake, which is what most of the other ones seem to have been, like Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, they just seem to have been shot-for-shot sanitized remakes. The Jungle Book actually was a reconnection with the source material that had nods to the animated movie just kind of sprinkled in because they were expected. And because of that, the 2016 Jungle Book holds up on its own, as its own movie.
I think if you are going to remake something, in order for it to have the staying power of the original, it must have merit on its own merit and not purely on the basis of nostalgia.
Yeah.
Which is what the Lion King remake has. It's nostalgia.
Well, I haven't watched any of these live action remakes so I maybe don't have a frame of reference here, but
I am this close to making the 2016 Jungle Book a topic.
Well, I think with any kind of remake of anything kind of has to stand on its own merits and not be compared to the original. I mean, now the thing I will always go to when we talk about remakes is the science fiction series Battlestar Galactica, where I actually think, and hey, people will fight me on this, the remake was better than the original. One of the few occasions. But yeah, a lot of the time, I think sometimes with remakes, it's trying to recapture a bit of nostalgia or whatever. I think it's always good if you're going to do a remake, do it a little bit different so it stands on its own merits.
And I think there is a difference between a remake and a modern retelling.
Yeah.
I'm here for modern retellings.
And
reception and everything else. I am not necessarily here for remakes.
To be fair, the example I gave, Battlestar Galactica may be more of an example of a modern retelling than a remake.
That's why I said it. Yeah.
And I think the 2016, like, even though it's branded as a remake, I think the 2016 Jungle Book can be more described as a retelling because, like I said, it's a reconnection with the source material.
Yeah, or if it's a reattempt at a more faithful telling of the original source material, I can go with that. But a shot-for-shot remake, and the only difference is the animation style, I'm sort of looking at you thinking, but why?
Yeah. Or, like, you're you're a 90s kid versus a millennial, or you're a 90s kid versus a 2000s kid, if your opinion on which underrated Disney movie, or based on your opinion on which underrated animated Disney movie should be remade in live action.
I will admit, and I will say, I would probably have time if they remade the Robin Hood Disney movie as a live action remake. I would probably have time for that.
Yeah. So I had that already.
I've got time. But in the same way as I've got time for pretty much any telling of the Robin Hood story on film.
Yeah.
I've got time for that because I enjoy that source material. Except the Kevin Costner one.
Noodle, have you watched the 80s TV series Robin the Sherwood?
I think so.
But
I had a phase as a teenager where all I watched was Robin Hood stuff. Yeah.
I'll if you haven't, I'll send you a link later. Okay, I'll send you a link later to see what you think of this.
Now, because from what I've seen on the internet, there are two main schools of thought on one, post-Renaissance Disney movie that didn't really get a fair shake, but it had some good concepts, and so could, essentially deserves a live action revisiting.
Are you talking about Atlantis?
Yeah, for the millennials, it's Atlantis. For the Zoomers, and 2000s kids, it's Treasure Planet.
If they remake it as a thought experiment, I might be on board, but
Atlantis for me represents far too many of those problematic tropes that should have been left in the Disney classic era. And if you were to remake that shot for shot live action, that would be a hell of a conversation parents would need to have with their kids when showing them. I'm not saying don't have the conversation. I'm just saying, wow, that's not a conversation I would feel good to have.
So
to be honest,
when I'm using the word remake, I'm meaning retelling or revisitation.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to have, if you put a different spin on it, whereby the Atlantans weren't essentially a Disney-fied version of Ancient Aliens, I'd have more time for it.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe if they actually presented it like the original version, it's a thought experiment, I may be more on board with it. But
there's no plot to a thought experiment. That's the problem.
Yeah, I know. That's herein lies the problem, and
maybe that's just a lesson in maybe don't try and have a philosophical conversation with people who haven't figured out object permanence yet.
Yeah.
I think therefore I am. 3-year-old, Descartes, I think therefore I am. I can't see it, therefore it is not.
Yeah.
A different level.
Yeah.
But
I'd say there's better introductions to philosophical topics, I'd say.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the major issue I have with some of the quote-unquote live-action remakes is they're remaking films whose animation stands up anyway. Yeah. They're remaking The Lion King. They're remaking the films that are famously beautiful in the original version.
Yeah, well,
why don't they go back and remake Snow White? Why don't they go back and remake Sleeping Beauty? Go back and remake Robin Hood. The films where the animation is a tiny little bit janky looking now. It does look a bit dated.
funny that you mention Snow White.
Yeah, I know they've gone back to remake it, but yeah. That's a whole different ballgame.
They haven't. They haven't, have they?
And
yeah,
no.
didn't you see Peter Dinklage go off on one on Twitter?
Yeah, one
no,
of the other
don't
news,
do this. Don't do this.
like media-related news stories that came out this week was Peter Dinklage having a go at Disney.
He's got a point. So maybe don't remake Snow White, but Sleeping Beauty, you know, there's an argument for it. It's a dated top thing of
I
a
mean,
woman
technically
with no
they already
and...
did Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah. But they did it in a way that modernized it and everything else.
Yeah.
So, and it is that, you know, in 15 years, are they going to do a live action remake of Frozen?
Yeah.
Probably. Almost certainly.
And that's the problem. Where's the creativity anymore?
Yeah.
But I don't think, again, this is not a Disney thing. Exclusively a Disney thing.
It's an industry-wide issue.
It's industry-wide issue of going back to stuff that's worked in the past and we'll reboot that or we'll redo this in a certain way. This has been, I think, like I said, it's an industry-wide problem for at least 20 years now.
Yeah, American Hollywood remaking European films.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, a good example was like the American remake of The Girl with the Dragon 2, for example, which was bad.
The ink on the document that confirmed that Another Round got the Oscar wasn't even dry before the rights had been sold to a Hollywood studio.
We're going to put Leonardo DiCaprio in the leading role.
Yeah.
But also, even Hollywood, we're making Hollywood movies from years ago. They're like now, okay, fight me on this. The original movie Total Recall with Schwarzenegger was fucking brilliant. In its own sort of cheesy, over the top way, it was a fucking brilliant movie. Why anyone felt the need to make a remake of that, I have no idea. The remake was bad. It was just bad.
Or but I mean, what is more emblematic of Hollywood and especially of Disney than just recycling content?
This is the problem. When your audience only has a lived memory of 5 years, you can get away with recycling shit for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah, sorry, I had to get that jab of just recycling frames of animation.
To put it in another perspective for you, okay, let me put it in another perspective. Money, no object. Let's say money, no object. Genre, like style of remake, no object, i.e. live action, actual live action, CGI, animation, whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
Think of your favourite film. Would you want a remake? Would you want a remake of The Princess Bride, The Blues Brothers? You know, these classic films that are as accessible to kids as they are to adults.
You do know that a remake of The Princess Bride is on the table. Do you realise this, Noodle?
Yes, I'm aware of that. That's why I said it.
Yeah.
How many of us are actually going to watch it without...
Yeah, it's like... I mean, that's a difficult thing to quantify. If you were saying to me, how would if I had the power, could I redo one of my favourite movies?
Essentially, when Disney says it's going to make a movie, money is no object.
Yeah.
Because Disney is that powerful and that rich. Can you genuinely think of a film that you would want Disney to remake? That you loved in the original? Ergo, thinking about
Probably not.
what is the
Honestly,
point of remakes?
again,
it's not to sell to the people who saw the original, is it? It's for a new generation.
Yeah.
Why aren't
I mean,
they showing the new generation the old version? Because the old version is no longer profitable. It's not profitable to show your kids the same 20-year-old video. You've got to go out and buy it on DVD.
Again, no. This is that's more of an issue of remakes in general, rather than exclusively
but this
Disney
is the point
thing.
I'm making, that remakes are a symptom of capitalism.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. It's a lazy kind of thing of, hey, this worked before. Well, let's go revisit this. Let's rehash this, and rather than let anyone come up with anything new. And yeah, there have been occasions. Yes, there have been occasions where people have been involved and been allowed a certain amount of creative freedom to do a remake of a film, stroke TV series, or whatever, in a way that's different enough that maybe captures the essence of what the original was, but does it in a different way to make it stand out on its own.
There's an important operative word in the sentence you just said. They have been allowed creative.
Allowed. It's a big, yeah.
They've been allowed. Yeah. It is not a given. And that's the problem. Because it's limited. And when that creative freedom is limited, we get what we've got now, which is remakes galore and not really a lot. I am sure. Look, let's be straight here. The kids who are growing up now with Frozen, with Tangled, with Encanto and all these, are those kids who are really, in 20, 25 years, going to be having the kind of conversations we're having now about classic Disney, about those movies? Have those same nostalgic feelings and everything else? Or is there something missing? And is the thing that's missing that creative drive and that willingness to challenge and to present difficult topics?
Yeah.
What film of the kids of this generation of Disney, the Pixar Disney generation, what film have they got to point to and say that traumatized me because it showed someone dying for the first time? What film have they got for that?
I can't think of one off the top of my head.
I mean,
I'm sure there's one that exists,
Up, but that's Pixar, not Disney proper.
And Up is at least a decade old now.
Well, and also Toy Story 3.
Because I was going to say Up, but yeah. Honestly, off the top of my head, I can't think. Yeah.
There are no generation-defining films coming out anymore. I define my generation by, was it Bambi or Lion King that traumatized you?
Yeah.
Were you a Little Mermaid girl or a Pocahontas girl? Were you,
I know I was none of these things, even though I grew up in some of the eras you're talking about here, Noodle. But
but do you know what I mean? It's kind of,
I know what you're saying.
That shared ubiquity, that shared experience is just Disney's. To me, it genuinely feels like Disney is, and I hate to say it, chasing the glory days.
Yeah.
Well, it's like
they're doing some good work.
Yeah.
But they've lost the magic and they're chasing it. And for some people, the magic will still be there, but a lot of it's nostalgia, and a lot of it is we look at things like Luca, like Encanto, like Frozen, and we look and we think we like it, but we only like it because there's not really an alternative.
Yeah, and I think again, you said this is a very capitalistic thing, Noodle. That Yeah, I mean, you got to any movie studio company, they're in the business of making money. Okay, yes, we all accept that. That's the thing. But I think so. So a lot of the time, it's more like let's revisit some stuff that's worked in the past that's made us money, rather than have maybe some certain people got some new ideas or a new concept we could put forward. There would be a good bit of media to put forward on its own that may have it may have artistic value, maybe not, but may make money in its own right. Where it is. I mean, and I would admit this: if I was a kind of was one of the CEOs of one of these companies, I'd be like, yeah, let's stick with a tried and tested formula that's going to make us money. I get that,
I don't want to have to explain. Yeah, I don't want to have to explain to the boss why my idea wiped 40% off the value of the company.
Now,
exactly, yeah, and I would almost be like, yeah, okay, this worked in the past. Let's go back to this.
I did remember a traumatic Disney death that came out quote unquote recently. By recently, I mean it was 2014.
Again, that's already a generation behind.
Yeah.
Think about it. If a kid was born in... There is a generation of kids at 7, 8 years old, the target audience for Disney movies, to whom that movie you're thinking of came out before they were born.
Yeah.
Ergo, most of them probably aren't going to show much interest in it.
Yeah, because...
What have they got?
Yeah. For those who were curious, the movie I'm thinking of is Big Hero 6.
Yeah. And it is that situation of the classics must remain because nothing has yet replaced them.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because of capitalism. And yes, the classics have their place, but until something better comes along for these classics, we're kind of stuck with them. And they're great jumping off points for educational conversations. But if you do just want a movie to sit down and pop some corn and curl up with your kid on the sofa and have a family movie night, I don't think classic era Disney, or really any Disney pre 2010-ish, is going to be suitable. And that's because Disney has utterly failed to create a new generation of a new canon within its generation. It's sanitized. What it's done, Disney used to take really dark things and sanitize them a little bit for kids. What it's done now is taken the things that it already sanitized and then sanitize them again.
Yeah.
Or
what it's done.
It's maybe it's bought other properties though as well though that it has attempted to sanitize in certain ways. I mean, certainly, anyone who's familiar with Marvel Comics pre-Disney, for example.
And I do think as well with the problem is I saw it's kind of, you see it with a lot of companies. It's usually the writing on the wall for creativity when companies start buying up their competitors.
Yeah.
Because what they're saying is we are no longer competitive in this market, and the only way we can stay relevant is by wiping out the competition. So Disney
yeah,
buying up
that's
Marvel, Pixar, and everything. You
Star
sort of
Wars.
look at it and you think, yeah, Star Wars.
Mm.
You just sort of look at it and you think.
And you can't think, yeah. I mean, okay, as a business move, yeah. Buying the rights to Star Wars, buying the rights to Marvel, are probably two of the smartest moves Disney ever made. As
Probably
a
the only
company,
reason Disney's still profitable.
almost certainly,
But
they
why
are.
is that the case? The reason that's the case is because Disney, rather than focusing on making creative output that will be profitable and appealing, has decided to buy up its competitors and buy their audiences.
And it is kind of ironic because, like, if you're thinking, like, if you're gonna say one of the two kiddish or family-ish movies that came out this year, and I'm not talking strictly animated, is more likely to be a childhood trauma movie, I'd say Spider-Man No Way Home is probably the most likely.
I haven't watched that Ring yet. Ring, no spoilers, please.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but like, you see, if you want to watch a good family film now, do you really reach for Disney? Or do you reach for DreamWorks? Do you reach for Studio Canal? Do you reach for, another movie? Do you reach for classic Disney? How often do you?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Reach
I think
for the latest release if you want a good classic movie.
I guess if you don't know any better, you're going to be like, Disney's a tried and trusted name. You'd probably reach for that, but
yeah, okay. Here's another question. We all know classic Disney.
Yeah.
Been around 2 or 3 generations. Yeah. It has rewatch value.
Yeah.
What's the rewatch value of these modern releases? Like, okay, you watched Luca last year, Brie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you gone back and rewatched it?
No.
Have you even thought to go back and rewatch it?
Not really.
Can you imagine a situation where you would go back and rewatch it?
Like maybe if I were going to a trip, maybe if I were about to go on a trip to Italy just for the thematic lulls.
Yeah.
well, there is always the possibility that I would meet Ring in person, put a gun to their head, and say, "You will watch this, or I will kill you." That's if we're going to go down that route,
Now, that being said, I am probably gonna now it's looking terribly bad because my brain is doing the brain not working thing, and I lost the title in my head. I would likely rewatch Onward. That's it. I would likely rewatch Onward. I really enjoyed that one.
Okay.
But that could also be because I'm a huge D&D nerd, and it was very D&D-ish.
Okay, it's Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
You're flicking through the channels on the TV. Let's say you've got a 7-8-year-old. Yeah?
Yeah.
And you've got a choice. You've got Frozen on one channel or The Lion King on the other.
Which Lion King?
The first Lion King, the first one, the original.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to sit and watch?
Oh, God damn, The Lion King.
Now, I'm saying this as someone who hasn't seen Frozen yet. I'd probably watch Frozen just out of curiosity.
I've watched Frozen. I would watch Lion King again.
Yeah.
You know,
that's the easiest answer to a question ever, in my opinion. But
you can take any two movies from those different eras and pit them against each other. Which one would you rewatch? Yeah. Would you rewatch Tangled or would you rewatch Robin Hood? Would you rewatch Luca or would you rewatch Atlantis? Would you rewatch? You know, pick and choose. I just picked two really famous ones.
Yeah.
Though, you know, that being said, I think Encanto might have rewatch value.
And I think Encanto could go one of two ways. It could end up the same as Frozen, or it could have massive rewatch value.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Frozen kind of had its day. It was everywhere, and then it just disappeared, like Minions.
Yeah, Despicable Me.
Yeah.
It had its thing, but would you really sit down and rewatch it? If there was an alternative?
I'm sorry that you mentioned Despicable Me, so now I have to. It's funny. So Despicable Me and Megamind, you know, released in the same year in the Hollywood twinning phenomenon, right? Occasionally you'll get two movies that are exactly this, you know, basically the same movie released at the same time. The thing is, you know, Despicable Me was a huge, massive success, and aside from Minions merch being everywhere, it just kind of disappeared. Megamind was something of a flop, but everyone who's having discourse is talking about Megamind.
Yes, because they are not saturated by it.
Yeah.
They're not exhausted by it. And I do think maybe Disney's jumped the shark a bit on its advertising in that it's marketing stuff a bit too much. Yeah. Because if you think about it, the Disney movies that came out when we were younger, Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, if you're older, you know, Lion King, Little Mermaid, films like that, they weren't massively advertised. There weren't piles and piles of merchandise. There weren't, you know, it wasn't, there were like every kid got it for Christmas, and T-shirts and lunchboxes and pencil cases.
Oh
and
no,
I would say
I'm in the age group of Lion King being released. That was massively marketed. McDonald's Happy Meal level marketed.
Yeah, no, I had a Nala, a stuffed Nala in my Happy Meal.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is you didn't walk into every shop and hear the circle of life. You didn't, you know, you didn't turn on the TV and see.
Oh yes, you did.
They weren't singing, you know, One of Us on Pop Idol. They were, you know, it wasn't. It didn't. You heard it once in a while.
You don't remember you don't remember Circle of Life being number one in the UK charts for like 8 weeks, Noodle.
I remember it being number one, but what I'm getting at is that was there, yeah. But then it kind of, and a lot of the reason Circle of Life was number one was because it was Elton John. But with Frozen, the entire reason Frozen got as big as it did was the pure marketing of it. It was everywhere. There were adverts for it on Twitter, on Facebook. You walked into shops. I didn't see Frozen for over 2 years after it came out, and I knew the song from Frozen by heart.
Yeah.
And I'd actively avoided it because I was like, I'm not interested.
I think the big thing that I would say Disney as messed up on is that with things like Frozen, it's not that they've marketed it in a bunch of ways, like with all the lunchboxes and stuff, that's the problem. It's the fact that the audio advertising is so everywhere that the parents have started to notice it rather than it being a thing that they don't notice and then it's in their head. And because they're consciously thinking about it and they were consciously thinking about it for a relatively prolonged period of time, they've effectively burnt themselves out on Frozen. And that, I think, is that Frozen... I wouldn't ever really rewatch Frozen because I'm burnt out on it. But if it hadn't been everywhere, and if I hadn't watched it at least 300 times already, I probably would go back to it.
It's like, when last did you hear a song from The Little Mermaid in a shop? If ever. But that was a brilliant soundtrack. You never heard that played in shops.
Yeah, it'll like come up on the radio, but never really elsewhere.
Maybe, yeah, if someone requested it on a radio station, it'd be played. But it wasn't just everywhere.
Yeah.
And to me, it almost felt like Frozen the song sold Frozen the film rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, I know I had a little disagreement with Noodle on bit about because, you know, yes, the stuff from The Lion King was equally everywhere. I have the memory of that as a kid. It was everywhere. They bombarded you with merchandise. But yes, Frozen. But more, I guess I understand when Noodle's coming to Frozen. Yes, they absolutely media bombarded you with that stuff. Absolutely everywhere. Is
like,
I guess I think that's where you're coming. I think that's where you're coming from, Noodle. I'm guessing, but
yeah, like if you were a Cinderella girl, what could you get? A pencil case, a lunchbox, a Halloween costume, and maybe a beach towel. If you're a Frozen girl, you've got dolls, you've got T-shirts, you've got PJs, you've got dresses, you've got songs, you've got games, you've got computer games, you've got sequels and re-releases, and you've got, on top of your pencil cases, stationery, lunchbox, water bottle. And you're also hearing it in Primark and Morrison's and anywhere else you want to go shop.
And also you can decorate a full-ass bedroom with it.
Yeah, like, exactly. You could you have decorated a full-ass bedroom with Lion King merch, Scummer?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It was everywhere when that was released.
I remember when Cars came out and we laughed because they released a Cars themed bed. Do you remember the Cars bed? The famous Cars bed?
That was interesting when that was a thing.
Yeah. And you know, it's almost I walked through airports and seen clips of Frozen. And I mean clips showing on the TV screens, not adverts, clips.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't do that with Hercules. You couldn't do that with The Emperor's New Groove. Can you imagine if you walked into Primark and you heard a song from The Emperor's New Groove on the sound system?
You'd be like, huh? What's that?
You think you're falling into an alternate dimension.
Honestly, I didn't even hear the. Honestly, I didn't even hear The Emperor's New Groove until the fact you said you wanted to cover it on your channel ring. Honestly,
you know,
I didn't even know about this movie existed.
Ever, you know, if you walked into what's that famous department store in America, Macy's?
Yeah,
just Tiffany's, whatever. Yeah,
that's the gospel truth from Hercules. You'd be weirded out. But you walk in there and hear "Let It Go," and that's just normal. Do you see
Well,
what I mean?
I mean there is something that could be said about the musical stylization differences between your examples.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah.
But even that aside, okay, the soundtrack to Spirit, the DreamWorks movie,
Yeah.
it was Bryan Adams. Yeah, the movie was popular. You didn't hear that soundtrack anywhere.
Yeah.
And you know, it's very. And it sounds like I'm picking on Frozen, but I'm not, because it does this with other movies as well. But I've
do quite have
noticed
to pick on
that
Frozen.
the life expectancy of interest in a Disney movie is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And you can tell that just by how long they're in the cinema. I mean, COVID aside, there used to be a time if a Disney movie got released, it'd be in the cinema for 6 months.
Yeah.
Now you're lucky if it's in there for 6 weeks.
Oh yeah,
So,
I mean this.
that
this is the
that
thing
could
with
be
the
be a problem with the advent of streaming as well, because I'm unfortunately I think the cinema as an experience is dying.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing is, like I said, I grew up in an era where a lot of the old Disney films got re-released in the cinemas. Okay, so I got to see, as I said, I think Jungle Book, I said, was the first film I ever went to see in the cinema. I saw Pinocchio in the cinema. I saw Snow White and Seven Dwarfs in the cinema. I saw Bambi in the cinema.
I saw
so
Bambi, the re-release, the 90s re-release.
Yeah. And again, I don't know necessarily whether a lot of the stuff Disney is making now would be, hey, they could re-release this in 20 years to a whole new generation and it would have that same effect.
Let me put it another way, because I've been talking about Frozen versus Lion King.
Yeah.
Frozen now has a musical, yes? They've made Frozen the musical. Do you think Frozen the musical is still going to be on Broadway in 25 years' time?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Lion King's still going.
Lion King's still, yeah.
So, it does just beg, one final question is, what can Walt say except you're welcome?
Oh God, we could do a whole nother stream on Walt himself.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother rabbit hole to
for that stream.
go into. That's a whole. Yeah, let's not go into it here because that is a
sorry,
whole.
I had to make the Maui reference.
Yeah, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Oh my word, yeah. Walt himself is a whole rabbit hole in itself to get into of his ideas and so on. And I don't think necessarily that he was a really nasty or evil man or anything, but I think he was
like the output of his publishing house. Walt Disney was a man of his time.
Yeah, he was.
That's the charitable description, I think. Very charitable.
That being said, we're coming up on 4 hours.
Yeah, so I think maybe we definitely should save this for another time. Put a pin in this for another time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to run round. Animated only, because this is something that I thought about. What's your favorite Disney quote?
Ooh.
Animated only.
Animated only.
Oh, look, I can't think of one off the top of my head. Can we just go for animated movie we like best? Can we Just do that.
I asked quotes specifically to make a point.
Okay. Off the top of my head, I can't. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one.
I'll ask this question instead. Off the top of your head, animated only, what's your favourite Disney song?
Oh, I see what you're doing.
Hi-ho!
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Alibaba had them 40 features, I'd have had 1,000 tails.
It's off to work we go.
Chaos?
Yeah, okay, there we go.
I'm probably tied between Surface Pressure from Encanto and
yeah, that hit me. That hit me. Hit me deep. That brought up trauma.
You can tell what trauma someone's got by which Encanto songs they like. Mine was We Don't Talk About Bruno and Surface Pressure. But that We Don't Talk About Bruno is probably tied with the song about King John from Robin Hood.
Oh, yeah, King John.
No, I'll say that.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted to go, like, so favourite Disney animated movie, because people have favourite Disney animated movie.
No, the reason Robin Hood, without doubt. The reason I've asked these questions, because my favourite song's from The Lion King 2.
Yeah.
Upendi from The Lion King 2. But the reason I ask those questions is because fundamentally they reveal what Disney films are. Disney films are not about speeches and conversations.
Yeah.
They are fundamentally entertainment.
Yeah.
And therefore entertainment will always be behind anything that's designed to be educational. It's not to say you can't use them educationally, but they are fundamentally entertainment. Yeah. That's why we remember the songs and the colours and the merchandise, but we don't really remember the conversations. And it's very interesting. None of us picked a song from a major Disney classic. And yet, if I started playing Hakuna Matata, you'd all join in.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Well,
even if they're not favourites, they're all considered higher, I think.
I guess a good thing as example is a friend of mine recently was trying to do some little dive into some history and asked a question on Facebook. Does anybody know any good documentary films about King John of England? So I sent him a GIF of Robin Hood's Disney. This is the one to watch, and there's a GIF of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we remember. We remember the humour and the colour and the sound. We don't remember the plot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
which basically takes everything we've said for the last nearly 4 hours and discounts it, because your kids ain't going to remember shit about this stuff anyway, so it don't really matter if they absorb all that problematic stuff because they're not going to remember it.
Yeah.
Or does it matter because they're not going to remember where they learned that problematic stuff?
Yeah. And also, Noodle needs to watch Encanto.
Yes, Noodle needs to watch Encanto.
Yes. I feel like if my parents had thought about it more, I don't think my mum would have been as okay with Robin Hood being one of my favourite films ever as she was.
I will still, if Robin Hood comes on TV, I will still just sit and watch it. It's like
Same.
Robin Hood, old episodes of Columbo and like The Godfather and Shawshank Redemption. If those films are on, do not disturb. And the Blues Brothers, do not disturb. You know?
It's 106 miles to Chicago. We've got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes.
Half a packet of cigarettes.
Yeah.
It's
and
that.
we're wearing sunglasses.
And we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
Yeah. If I will watch the animated Robin Hood film with someone that I'm dating, I'm very confident in that relationship because I do not want that film messing up for me.
Yeah.
Also, I'm almost I'm almost regretting saying which Encanto song hit me the hardest because I was gonna have Noodle guess.
Don't worry, I've forgotten.
Okay, good.
You know what I'm like. I'm terrible.
So I think that about wraps up our final thoughts.
Final thoughts, I think, is the quote you said halfway through, and I'm going to repeat now. You can either run from the past or you can learn from it.
Oh yeah, that's a memorable quote from a Disney movie.
Yes, but it's not a favorite, is it?
Yeah. Final thoughts, Chaos.
Fuck Disney as a company, but a lot of the stuff they've produced, I will continue to consume.
Yeah.
Why boycotts don't work 101.
Yeah.
In the illustrious, my final thoughts. In the illustrious words of my good friend, the Bad-Tempered Badger, Disney is non-canon.
Yeah. As Chaos said, like I have major issues with Disney as a company, but they make good content.
Yes, I'm more than happy to pirate their content as well, which is a joke for legal reasons.
Yeah.
For legal reasons, that's a joke.
Oh yes, I also get my Disney content fair use. Or open source. That was the term. I get my Disney content open source.
You get your Disney content legally, okay, Ray?
No, it is completely legally.
There we go.
I'm just not paying for it.
Yes, because your mother's paying for it.
Yes.
She's also paying for my
I'm just trying to like.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure that Media Musings does not get sued and become part of the Disney empire here. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
With that, we'll move to shilling.
Nothing much for me to shill, so.
Chaos.
I did have a couple of bits of content in the works, and then my laptop died on me. So I will get back to you when I have a device to make content on.
Okay, hold on. Let me just turn my camera off for this bit. Okay. For me, I haven't got necessarily anything on schedule, but I am possibly planning to do a little takedown of S.J. Thomason. The stupid shit she said about Marxism on a debate she was on the other night. I'm planning maybe to do a reaction to that, which should be a bit of fun because fuck S.J. Thomason. But yeah, other than that, I've got nothing really. That's something I'm possibly going to do in the next week or so, but I haven't really got necessarily anything set in stone on the plans on my channel. But hey, go and give my YouTube channel God the Skimmer a sub because I'm trying to get to 500 so I can get my community tab. So help me out.
And Media Musings will be back next week. Don't know what the topic will be. Though I will say we may either have to start earlier or be more constrained in our episodes in the future because of schedule shiftings. But
we'll discuss that after, though. So.
Yeah. With that, we'll go to taglines.
Take care, be good, and if you can't be good, remember, use your noodle when you're reading.
Have a day, and remember, communication is key.
And Scummer?
I don't really do taglines, as you know, but because I'm in the mood for it, I'll just say fuck S.J. Thompson.
And remember, the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think on. Too often, we forget that.